The certified letter sat unopened on our kitchen counter for 2 days. Something about the Mitchell family crest embossed on the envelope made my stomach turn. When I finally gathered the courage to open it, the document inside confirmed my worst fears. My name, Sarah Mitchell, appeared at the top, followed by a series of clauses that effectively sought to strip away my independence. As I read through the so-called family loyalty agreement, my hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a slow-burning anger I hadn't felt since my days as an investigative journalist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah, did you see my blue tie? James called from upstairs, oblivious to the bombshell that had landed in our kitchen. I quickly tucked the document into my laptop bag just as my husband appeared, looking every bit the Mitchell heir in his tailored suit. The worry must have shown on my face because his expression immediately shifted. What's wrong? Is it the Henderson account? I forced a smile. Just work stress. Your tie is on the dresser, right where you left it. As James headed back upstairs, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother-in-law. Looking forward to our family dinner on Friday. We have important matters to discuss. I didn't need to be an investigative journalist to decode that message. 3 years ago, when James proposed, I thought I knew what marrying into the Mitchell family meant. The prestige, the expectations, the country club memberships, and charity galas. What I didn't anticipate was Eleanor Mitchell's increasing determination to control every aspect of our lives, especially after I declined a position at the family's media company to expand my own consulting business. The Mitchell Media Group was Oak Ridge's crown jewel, a publishing empire that had expanded into digital marketing under Eleanor's shrewd leadership after her husband Richard stepped into a chairman role. The company occupied a renovated historic building downtown, all gleaming glass and restored brick, much like the Mitchell family itself, traditional foundations with a carefully modernized facade. I set the loyalty contract on my desk and dialed Olivia, my closest friend since college, and the only person who truly understood the Mitchell family dynamics. They actually sent it? Olivia's voice crackled through the speaker. I thought, you were exaggerating. Wish I was, I sighed, flipping through the pages. Listen to this. The undersigned agrees to prioritize Mitchell family events above all other commitments, and all business ventures must be approved by the Mitchell Family Council. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. There's a clause here about maintaining appropriate public appearance, and even one about financial transparency, basically giving them access to my personal accounts. This is insane, Olivia said. What does James say? I hesitated. He doesn't know yet. Eleanor sent it directly to me with a note saying we'll discuss the formalities at the family dinner on Friday. Sarah, you need to tell him before then. I know. But I trailed off, thinking about how James had been caught between his mother's expectations and my independence since the day we met. He's finalizing that partnership deal this week. The timing is terrible. This isn't about timing. This is about your life. After hanging up, I stared at my computer screen where the Mitchell Media quarterly report sat open, the company I had refused to join, but still helped behind the scenes whenever James asked. I'd spent last weekend revamping their digital strategy, proposal, work that Eleanor would present as her own. And now this contract lands on my doorstep. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I spotted Rebecca, James's younger sister, shuffling on our porch with an uncharacteristic nervousness. I quickly tucked the contract into a drawer before opening the door. Becca, this is a surprise. Rebecca Mitchell had always been the family rebel, art school instead of business, tattoos hidden beneath corporate attire, and a genuine warmth that defied the Mitchell polish. She brushed past me, glancing around as if checking for surveillance. Did you get it? she asked without preamble. Get what? Don't play dumb, Sarah. The agreement. Mother's sending them to everyone this week. Even Marcus got one. Marcus was her long-term boyfriend, whom Eleanor had never quite approved of. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't singled out. Yes, it came yesterday. Rebecca collapsed onto our sofa. I knew it. Ever since Dad's health scare, she's gone full dictator. She's convinced the family is losing its identity. The air quotes were accompanied by an eye roll that momentarily made her look like a teenager rather than a successful graphic designer. What did Marcus say about it? He laughed, then realized it wasn't a joke. She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite us being alone. But here's what you don't know. Claire Wilson tore hers up at Sunday brunch. Claire Wilson was married to Eleanor's nephew, a minor branch of the Mitchell family tree, but still subject to its shadow. What happened? Nuclear meltdown. Mother threatened to cut them off from the family trust. Trevor caved immediately, and now Claire's staying with her sister. Rebecca's expression darkened. That's why I'm here. Whatever you do, don't let James see that contract before you have a plan. Trevor and Claire were solid until this thing came between them. After Rebecca left, I sat in our silent townhouse, thoughts racing. Claire and Trevor had dated since high school, had 2 children, and by all appearances, were the Mitchell family's success story. If they could fracture over this, what chance did James and I have? My consulting business had finally gained momentum, with clients who sought me out not because of the Mitchell name, but because of my expertise in digital media strategies. The contract would effectively place my career under Eleanor's approval, my client list subject to family scrutiny, and my schedules at the mercy of Mitchell family obligations. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in over a year, Daniel Cohen, the attorney who had helped me negotiate my largest client contract. Daniel had a reputation for being ruthlessly effective while maintaining an almost pathological politeness. He'd once told me, I never raise my voice because I never have to. His assistant put me through immediately. Sarah Mitchell, he greeted me warmly. Please tell me you've landed another major client. Not exactly, I replied, then outlined the situation as clinically as I could. The silence on the other end stretched for a moment before Daniel spoke again, his voice carefully measured. Sarah, do you have a copy of this document with you now? Yes. Excellent. I need you to do something unusual. Don't discuss this with anyone else, including James, until we've met. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I agreed, a mixture of relief and anxiety settling in my stomach. After hanging up, I forwarded him a scanned copy of the contract, then deleted the email from my sent folder. A lifetime of investigating. Stories had taught me that information was power, and right now, I needed every advantage. That night, as James and I moved through our evening routine, takeout dinner, work emails, half watching a documentary, I felt the weight of the unspoken secret between us. When he kissed me goodnight, murmuring about an early meeting, I wondered if our relationship could survive what was coming. Daniel's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with a view of the Mitchell Media headquarters across the plaza. I couldn't help but wonder if he'd chosen the location deliberately. His conference room was meticulously arranged, water bottles at each seat, notepads precisely aligned, the morning sunlight filtering through adjustable blinds. The Mitchell Family Loyalty Agreement, Daniel said, placing a copy on the table between us. The document now bore his annotations in precise blue ink. I've reviewed similar agreements before, typically in celebrity marriages or ultra-high net worth families. But this, he tapped the paper. This is exceptionally overreaching. Is it legal? I asked, the question that had kept me awake most of the night. Legal? Parts of it. Enforceable? Highly questionable. But the larger issue isn't its legality, it's the intent behind it. He turned to a specific page. This clause effectively places your business under family approval. This one requires you to disclose all professional contacts. And this, he flipped to the last page, would give your mother-in-law authority to speak on your behalf in professional settings. My journalist instincts kicked in. Why now? The timing seems deliberate. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, the practiced neutrality giving way to something like respect. An excellent question. Have there been recent changes in the family dynamic? Financial pressures? Health concerns? I thought of what Rebecca had mentioned. My father-in-law had a minor heart attack 3 months ago. He's recovered, but he's stepped back from day-to-day operations. And your mother-in-law has assumed more control? I nodded. Eleanor's always been involved, but now she's the public face of Mitchell Media. Which you've declined to join, despite pressure, Daniel noted, referencing our previous conversations. Yes, but I still help when asked. I revised their entire digital strategy last month. A thought struck me. The Henderson account. I connected them with Mitchell Media last week. It's potentially their biggest client this year. Daniel made a note. And when is this family dinner where they expect you to sign? Friday evening. 3 days. He closed his notebook. Sarah, I need to be absolutely clear about what you want. Do you want to preserve your independence while maintaining family harmony? Or are you prepared for a more adversarial approach? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about James, caught between loyalty to his family and love for me. About the Mitchell legacy that was both his birthright and his burden. I want to stay married to James without becoming a Mitchell employee. I want respect for my career, without being seen as a threat to their legacy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I paused, finding the words. I want them to understand that controlling me will only push us both away. Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then we have work to do. At home, I found a voicemail from Eleanor. Sarah, dear, I hope you've had time to review the family agreement. We'll expect your thoughts on Friday. James mentioned you've been working late. Do try to get some rest. Appearances matter at the Hendersons' reception next week. The casual mention of my work schedule confirmed what I'd suspected. Eleanor was monitoring me more closely than I'd realized. I deleted the message and called James. Can you meet for lunch? I asked when he answered. The background noise suggested he was at the Mitchell Media offices. I'm swamped with the Henderson presentation, he replied. Mother's added 15 slides to my section. It's important, James. The hesitation told me everything about the pressure he was under. Okay, golden pair at 1? The golden pair was busy enough to provide anonymity, but quiet enough for conversation. Neutral territory between my office and his. James arrived looking harried, his normally immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. What's so urgent? He asked after ordering coffee. Is it your mother? Is she ill? The genuine concern in his voice made what I had to do even harder. I reached into my bag and placed the contract on the table between us. Your mother sent this to me. Apparently, I'm expected to sign it on Friday. James stared at the document, confusion giving way to recognition, then dismay. He picked it up, flipping through pages with increasing agitation. I had no idea, he said finally, looking up at me. Sarah, I swear I didn't know about this. I believe you. And I did. James had always been transparent, sometimes to a fault. But it doesn't change the fact that your mother expects me to sign away my independence. This isn't like her. She's been under tremendous pressure since Dad's heart attack, and the board is questioning her leadership capabilities. She's probably just trying to solidify the family's position. By controlling your wife, by undermining my business. I kept my voice low despite the anger rising in my chest. Rebecca says Claire got the same contract and refused to sign. Now she and Trevor are separated. James paled. Trevor didn't mention anything. Would he? With Eleanor monitoring everyone's communications? That's not fair. Mother's protective, not controlling. I reached across the table and took his hand. James, I love you. But this isn't normal. No healthy family requires a loyalty oath. He withdrew his hand to run it through his hair, a gesture I recognized from countless moments of stress throughout our relationship. What do you want me to do? She's my mother, and the company is our family legacy. Talk to her. Tell her I won't be signing it, but I'm willing to discuss legitimate concerns about family obligations. And if she refuses to negotiate? The question hung between us like a live wire. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. James nodded slowly. I'll talk to her tomorrow. We have the board meeting in the morning, and she's always more reasonable after those. He attempted a smile. Maybe this is all just a misunderstanding. But as we parted outside the restaurant, his kiss on my cheek felt perfunctory, distracted. I watched him walk back toward the Mitchell Media Building, shoulders squared against an invisible weight. That evening, Daniel called with an update. I've reviewed the Mitchell family trust documents. They're public record due to certain tax filings. Interesting reading. Did you know there's a clause about family harmony? What does that mean? It means Eleanor can't actually cut off family members without cause. The trust was established by James's grandfather with specific protections against exactly this kind of manipulation. For the first time since receiving the contract, I felt a flicker of hope. Does James know this? Probably not. These documents are complex, and Eleanor has likely been the only one managing them since Richard's health declined. But here's something else. The Henderson deal you mentioned? Mitchell Media doesn't have the digital infrastructure to actually deliver what they're promising. But I just revised their entire strategy. On paper, yes, but their infrastructure is outdated. Unless they implement your recommendations fully, they're setting themselves up for failure. The implications weren't lost on me. And if they fail to deliver for their biggest potential client? Exactly. Eleanor needs your expertise more than she's admitting, which gives us leverage. Us? You asked for my help, Sarah. That makes it us. His tone remained professional, but I detected a warmth that reminded me why I'd chosen him in the first place. Now, about Friday's dinner. The next day passed in a blur of client calls and strategy sessions, my consulting work a welcome distraction from the looming confrontation. James texted after the board meeting. Mother's in a mood. Board questioned Q3 projections. Dinner tomorrow still on. Love you. No mention of our conversation or the contract. The knot in my stomach tightened. That night, as we prepared for bed, James finally broached the subject. I tried to talk to Mother about the agreement. I set down my book. And? She said it's non-negotiable. All Mitchell spouses are signing it. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. She mentioned your connection to the Henderson account. Said you were trying to undermine Mitchell Media by steering them toward your independent consultancy. That's ridiculous. I referred them to your company. I know that, but Mother's convinced there's a conflict of interest. She's worried about the family's reputation if the Hendersons were to split their business between Mitchell Media and independent consultants. I could almost admire the manipulation if it weren't so transparent. Eleanor was using James's devotion to the family business as leverage against me. And what do you think? I asked, watching him carefully. James looked exhausted, the weight of divided loyalties evident in the slump of his shoulders. I think my mother is terrified of losing control, and my wife is determined not to be controlled. And I'm caught in the middle, loving you both. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way for your mother to maintain the family legacy without compromising my independence? He looked skeptical, but hopeful. Do you have something in mind? Maybe. But I need you to trust me tomorrow night. No matter what happens at dinner, remember that everything I do is because I love you and respect your family's legacy. James studied my face, then nodded slowly. I trust you. As he drifted off to sleep beside me, I sent a final text to Daniel. All set for tomorrow. James knows something's coming, but not what. Eleanor's using the Henderson account as leverage. His response came immediately. Perfect. See you at a TUII. 7:30. Friday dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that showcases Oak Ridge at its best. Leaves turning on the old oaks that gave the city its name, historic buildings glowing in the golden light. I spent the morning finalizing a presentation for a new client, then the afternoon preparing for the evening ahead. The Mitchell family dinner was being held at the Garden Room in the Oak Ridge Country Club, neutral territory that still fell, firmly within Eleanor's comfort zone. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that projected professional confidence without appearing confrontational, added my grandmother's pearl earrings for a touch of familial respect, and arrived precisely on time. The garden room lived up to its name with botanical murals covering the walls and fresh flower arrangements on every surface. The Mitchell family was already seated at the long table. Eleanor at the head, Richard beside her looking frailer than... I remembered James to her right, Rebecca and Marcus opposite them. 2 empty seats awaited me and, presumably, Daniel. Sarah, darling. Eleanor rose to greet me, immaculate in a tailored cream ensemble that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her embrace was cool, perfunctory. We were just discussing the Henderson presentation. James tells me you've been quite involved. Hello, Eleanor. Yes, I've been happy to help where I can. I nodded to Richard, who gave me a warm but tired smile, then took my seat beside James, squeezing his hand under the table. We're not expecting anyone else, are we? Eleanor gestured to the empty chair beside me, her perfectly arched eyebrow, conveying the question. Actually, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited my attorney to join us. The table fell silent. Rebecca's eyes widened, and Marcus suddenly became very interested in his water glass. Richard sat up straighter, his expression alert for the first time since I'd arrived. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, though it failed to reach her eyes. An attorney? How unusual for a family dinner. May I ask why? He's here to discuss the family loyalty agreement you sent me. I thought it would be more efficient to address any legal questions directly. James shifted uncomfortably beside me, but didn't contradict me. His hand found mine again under the table, a silent affirmation of our conversation the night before. I see. Eleanor's voice cooled several degrees. Well, that seems unnecessarily formal, but of course, we welcome your consultation. The last word carried a hint of derision. As if on cue, the maître d' appeared at the door, escorting Daniel into the room. He looked exactly as I'd expected, impeccably dressed in a conservative suit, his expression pleasantly neutral as he approached our table. Good evening, everyone. I apologize for the intrusion on your family dinner. I'm Daniel Cohen, Mrs. Mitchell's attorney. He nodded respectfully to each person at the table, lingering slightly on Richard. Mr. Mitchell, it's an honor to meet you. I've admired your work in publishing for many years. Richard nodded, a hint of his old shrewdness, returning to his gaze. Any friend of Sarah's is welcome here. Eleanor gestured to the empty chair with barely concealed irritation. Please join us, Mr. Cohen. We were about to discuss family matters that apparently require legal oversight. Daniel took his seat beside me, placing his leather portfolio on the table. I understand you've presented Mrs. Mitchell with a family agreement. I've taken the liberty of reviewing it and preparing some thoughts. Have you indeed? Eleanor's tone was arctic, I wasn't aware that family matters were subject to external review. Mother, James interjected gently, if we're asking Sarah to sign a legally binding document, it's reasonable for her to seek legal advice. Eleanor's gaze snapped to her son, surprise and betrayal flashing across her features before she composed herself. Of course, if Sarah feels that's necessary. I believe what's necessary, Daniel said smoothly, is clarity about the intent behind this agreement. From my review, it appears designed to place Mrs. Mitchell's professional activities under family control, restrict her independent business relationships, and mandate her participation in family events above all other commitments. It ensures family loyalty, Eleanor countered, something increasingly rare in today's individualistic culture. Loyalty enforced by contract isn't loyalty at all, Mrs. Mitchell. It's coercion. Daniel's voice remained pleasant, conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than dropping a bombshell into the middle of the Mitchell family dynamics. Rebecca made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Marcus openly stared at Daniel with newfound respect. How dare you, Eleanor began, but Richard placed a hand on her arm. Let him speak, Ellie. I'd like to hear what he has to say. Daniel nodded his thanks. The Mitchell family has built an impressive legacy, one that any spouse would be honored to support. But support and subservience are different things. Mrs. Mitchell has demonstrated her commitment to your family's success repeatedly, most recently by connecting the Henderson Group with Mitchell Media, despite having the expertise to service that account herself. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. The Henderson account belongs with Mitchell Media. We have the resources, but not the digital infrastructure, Daniel interrupted gently. Not yet. According to my research, implementing Mrs. Mitchell's recent strategic recommendations would require significant updates to your systems, updates that would take months without expert guidance. James turned to me, confusion evident. Is that true? I nodded. I included the infrastructure requirements in my report, but that section was removed from the final presentation. By whom? Richard asked, his voice suddenly sharp. All eyes turned to Eleanor, whose composure finally slipped. It complicated the proposal unnecessarily. The board already questions our digital capabilities. As well they should, Richard said, surprising everyone. I've been reviewing the quarterly reports from my home office. Our digital growth has been flat for 2 years. Which brings me to an alternative proposal, Daniel said, opening his portfolio and distributing several copies of a document around the table. Rather than a loyalty contract, I suggest a mutually beneficial partnership. What kind of partnership? James asked, already skimming the document. One that respects Mrs. Mitchell's independence while leveraging her expertise for Mitchell Media's benefit. A consulting arrangement with clear boundaries, fair compensation, and mutual obligations, but without the restrictive personal clauses of the original agreement. Eleanor scoffed. This is absurd. We don't need to hire family. Actually, Mother, James said slowly, looking up from the document, this makes sense. Sarah's digital strategy for the Henderson account is brilliant, but I've been worried about our ability to execute it, with her guidance. He turned to me. You'd really do this? Formally consult for us while maintaining your other clients? I would, I said, meeting his gaze. I've never wanted to see Mitchell Media fail, James. It's your heritage, part of who you are. I just can't sacrifice my own identity to preserve it. Richard reached for the proposal, reading it carefully while Eleanor fumed beside him. This arrangement actually solves several problems. The board has been pushing us to bring in digital expertise. Sarah already understands our business model. And, he added, glancing at his wife, it preserves the family harmony clause in the trust. Eleanor's head snapped up. What do you know about that clause? Enough to know that forcing family members to choose between their spouse and their birthright violates it, Richard replied mildly. Did you think I wouldn't notice what happened with Trevor and Claire? The table fell silent again, the family dynamics shifting visibly as Richard reasserted his authority for the first time since his health scare. "I've been too passive," he continued, looking around the table, letting fear of my own mortality push me into the background while this family, my family, began to fracture under the guise of protection. He turned to Eleanor. "We built Mitchell Media together, Ellie. But we didn't build it to become a weapon against our own children and their chosen partners." Eleanor's carefully constructed facade crumbled slightly, revealing the fear beneath her controlling behavior. "The company is vulnerable, Richard. The industry is changing faster than we can adapt. If we lose control—" "We've already lost control," he said gently. "But we haven't lost our family. Not yet." He turned to me and Daniel. "This partnership proposal has merit. Eleanor and I will review it fully, but in principle, I believe it offers a path forward that respects everyone's interests." "And the loyalty agreement?" Daniel prompted. Richard looked directly at his wife. "Is withdrawn. Permanently. For all family members." The relief around the table was palpable. Rebecca reached for Marcus's hand openly for the first time that evening. James exhaled slowly beside me, the tension draining from his shoulders. Eleanor, however, wasn't finished. "And if I disagree? I am CEO now, Richard. At the pleasure of the board," he reminded her. "A board that might be interested to learn why the Henderson account is at risk due to misrepresented digital capabilities." It was the gentlest of threats, delivered with the calm assurance of someone who still held more power than he'd been exercising. Eleanor recognized it for what it was, a check on her authority, not a complete undermining of it. "I need time to consider this." "Alternative," she said finally, her dignity reasserting itself. "Of course," Daniel replied smoothly, closing his portfolio. "Mrs. Mitchell and I are available to discuss any questions you might have. And now," he added, standing, "I believe I've intruded on your family dinner long enough." As Daniel made his farewells, I caught his eye, mouthing a silent "thank you" as he departed. The tension in the room had transformed from hostile to merely uncomfortable. Progress, if not perfect resolution. "Well," Rebecca said into the silence, "this is the most interesting family dinner we've had in years. Can we order now? I'm starving." The unexpected comment broke the remaining tension, drawing reluctant smiles even from Eleanor. As the waiter approached to take our orders, James squeezed my hand under the table one final time, not in anxiety, now, but in solidarity. The evening wouldn't resolve everything, I knew. Eleanor's need for control wouldn't disappear overnight, and the balance between family obligation and personal independence would require constant negotiation. But as I looked around the table, at Richard's renewed engagement, Rebecca's open defiance, James's quiet support, and even Eleanor's grudging reassessment, I realized we had taken the first step toward a new kind of family dynamic. One built on respect rather than control, on genuine loyalty rather than contractual obligation. Later that night, as James and I walked to our car under the oak trees of the country club grounds, he pulled me close. "That was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen." "Which part?" I asked, leaning into his embrace. "Bringing your attorney to a Mitchell family dinner? No one challenges mother like that." "Someone should have long ago." I looked up at him. "Are you upset?" He considered this, then shook his head. "Relieved? Actually, I've been caught between you and my family for so long that I'd forgotten there might be a middle path." He kissed me gently. "Thank you for fighting for us instead of just walking away." As we drove home through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, I thought about the document that had started it all. The loyalty contract that had threatened everything I valued. Eleanor had tried to use it to formalize control over her family, never realizing that real loyalty couldn't be enforced through signatures and legal clauses. True loyalty, I reflected as James and I climbed the steps to our townhouse hand in hand, was what had brought me to that dinner table tonight. Not to surrender my independence, but to fight for a relationship worth preserving. It was what had given James the courage to support me even against his mother's wishes. And perhaps in time, it would be what helped Eleanor understand that letting go didn't mean losing her family, but rather allowing it to grow stronger in new and unexpected ways. The certified letter that arrived the following week bore the Mitchell family crest, just like the first one, but inside was a different kind of document, a formal consulting agreement, revised and signed by both Richard and Eleanor, with terms that respected my independence while valuing my contribution to the family business. Attached was a handwritten note from Richard. Loyalty isn't proven by what you're willing to sign, but by what you're willing to fight for. Welcome to the family, Sarah. The real one, not the one on paper. I tucked the note into my desk drawer, a reminder that sometimes the battles most worth fighting aren't against enemies, but for the people we love and the principles we believe in. The Mitchell family legacy would continue, but so would mine. Side by side, distinct but connected, exactly as it should be. Monday morning greeted me with a flurry of text messages from Rebecca. Holy thunderstorm, Sarah. Dad actually stood up to Mom. Are you free for coffee? We need to debrief. I smiled at her enthusiasm while preparing for my first client meeting of the day. The aftershocks of Friday's dinner were still reverberating through the Mitchell family, and I needed time to process everything myself before diving into family analysis with my sister-in-law. Rain check? I texted back, swamped with clients. Today? Tomorrow afternoon? Rebecca's response came immediately. Perfect. Golden pair at 3. Marcus says you're his new hero, by the way. He's drafting you for our family softball team. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The Mitchell family softball game was an annual tradition I'd always enjoyed, one of the few family events where Eleanor's controlling tendencies took a back seat to Richard's love of the game. Maybe things really were changing. My morning passed in a blur of video calls and strategy sessions. Several clients had been waiting on proposals that had taken a back seat to the Mitchell family drama, and I was determined to prove that my consulting business deserved the independence I'd fought so hard to protect. By noon, I'd finalized 2 major presentations and outlined a third, pausing only when my phone rang with James's ringtone. How's your day going? He asked, his voice warm but tired. I could hear the bustle of the Mitchell media offices in the background, phones ringing, conversations overlapping. Productive. Yours? He sighed. Mother's called an emergency management meeting to discuss digital integration strategies. 3 guesses what that's about. Has she mentioned Friday night? Not directly, but she brought the Henderson file to my office this morning and asked me to review the complete proposal, including all infrastructure recommendations. I leaned back in my chair, surprised. She's actually considering implementing my suggestions? It seems that way. Dad's in the office today, too. First time in months he's stayed for more than an hour. He's been in meetings with the board. All morning. James paused. Something's happening, Sarah. The power dynamic is shifting. Is that good or bad? Both, maybe? Mother's on edge, but Dad seems rejuvenated, like he's remembered why he built this company in the first place. He lowered his voice. Listen, can you come by the house tonight? Dad asked if we could have dinner, just the 3 of us. Richard wants to have dinner with us? Without Eleanor? That was unprecedented. In 3 years of marriage, I'd never had a private conversation with my father-in-law that wasn't observed by his wife. I know, it's strange, but I think it's important. Of course I'll be there. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering me since Friday. James, are we okay? After everything that happened? His response was immediate. We're better than okay. I should have stood up to Mother years ago about how she treats you. I was so caught up in maintaining family peace, that I didn't see the cost. The background noise on his end suddenly diminished, as if he'd moved to a quieter space. I'm proud of you, Sarah, for fighting for us in a way I wasn't brave enough to do. The simple sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'll see you tonight, I managed. Tell your father I'm looking forward to it. After hanging up, I stared at my computer screen, the half-finished presentation forgotten. Something fundamental had shifted in my marriage, in the Mitchell family dynamics. I'd prepared for battle and found unexpected allies, Richard reasserting himself, James finding his voice, Rebecca and Marcus standing in solidarity. Even Eleanor, in her reluctant consideration of my digital strategy, was acknowledging my professional value, if not yet my personal autonomy. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Just had an interesting call from Richard Mitchell. He'd like to meet tomorrow to discuss family business matters. Thoughts? The implications were significant. Richard reaching out directly to my attorney suggested he was serious about redefining the family's approach to spouses and boundaries. He's having dinner with James and me tonight, I replied. I'll let you know what comes up. Daniel's response was characteristically measured. Proceed with cautious optimism. Remember that family systems resist change, even positive change. That evening, I arrived at the Mitchell family home, a colonial masterpiece in Oak Ridge's historic district, with mixed emotions. Though I'd visited countless times for formal dinners and holiday gatherings, the house had always felt like Eleanor's domain rather than a family home. Tonight, however, as James greeted me at the door, with a kiss and led me to the smaller, more intimate dining room rather than the formal one Eleanor preferred, something felt different. Richard was waiting for us, standing by the fireplace where family photos documented generations of Mitchells. He looked both frailer and more substantial than he had at Friday's dinner, physically diminished by his recent health challenges, but somehow more present, more engaged. Sarah, he greeted me warmly, taking my hands in his. Thank you for coming. I realize this is unusual. Not at all, I said, embracing him gently. It's good to see you looking well. Looking well and feeling determined are two different things, he replied with a wry smile. Please, both of you, sit. Martha has prepared a simple dinner, and I've asked not to be disturbed. Martha, the Mitchells' longtime housekeeper, appeared with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses, then discreetly vanished, closing the dining room doors behind her. Richard poured the wine himself, an unheard-of departure from protocol in a house where servants typically handled such tasks. Eleanor is at her book club, he said, answering the unasked question. An engagement I specifically encouraged her to keep, despite her reluctance. He settled into his chair at the head of the small table, James and I on either side of him. I owe you both an apology. James and I exchanged surprised glances. Dad, you don't... Richard held up a hand. I do, son. These past months, I've allowed fear to dictate my actions, or rather, my inaction. After the heart attack, facing my own mortality, I made the mistake of retreating when I should have been more engaged than ever. He took a sip of wine, gathering his thoughts. When I founded Mitchell Media, it was with a vision of creating a legacy that would outlive me, something meaningful to pass on to my children and their children. Somewhere along the way, protecting that legacy became more important than nurturing the family it was meant to serve. Martha reappeared with the first course, a simple soup that steamed gently in the elegant china bowls. Richard waited until she'd gone before continuing. Eleanor's loyalty contract wasn't created in a vacuum. For years, I tacitly approved her increasing control over family matters, believing it came from the same place as my own concerns, a desire to protect what we'd built together. I was wrong. What changed your mind? I asked gently. Richard's gaze met mine directly. You did, Sarah. You and that remarkable attorney of yours. Watching you fight for your independence while still showing respect for this family's traditions, it reminded me of what real loyalty looks like." He turned to James. "And seeing my son finally stand up for his wife, even against his mother's wishes, showed me that the Mitchell backbone hasn't disappeared entirely." James flushed slightly but said nothing, his attention fixed on his father's words. "The heart attack forced me to confront not just my mortality, but the legacy I'm truly leaving behind. Is it Mitchell Media's balance sheet, the family name in the community? Or is it the values I've instilled in my children and the kind of relationships they're able to build?" Richard's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "I've decided it's the latter." Martha cleared the soup course and brought in the main dish, a simple roast with vegetables, comfort food rather than the elaborate fare Eleanor typically insisted upon for family dinners. Richard served us himself, another departure from protocol. "I've scheduled a meeting with your attorney tomorrow," he said to me, "to discuss a restructuring of the Mitchell Family Trust. The Family Harmony Clause needs strengthening and clarification to prevent the kind of manipulation Eleanor attempted with her loyalty contracts." James set down his fork. "Dad, are you sure that's necessary? Mother seems to be accepting the partnership arrangement with Sarah." "Accepting it under duress, because I forced her hand," Richard corrected. "That's not sustainable. Eleanor needs to understand that this family's strength lies in embracing our members' diverse talents and respecting their autonomy, not in controlling every aspect of their lives." He turned to me. "Your consulting arrangement is a good start, Sarah, but it's a Band-Aid on a deeper wound. We need structural change." "What kind of structural change?" I asked, intrigued by this new, assertive version of my previously passive father-in-law. "For one, the family trust will be amended to explicitly prohibit coercive agreements as a condition of family inclusion. For another, all family members, including spouses, will have a voice in decisions that affect the family as a unit." He smiled slightly. "I'm also considering restructuring the company board to include more outside voices. We've been too insular for too long." James looked stunned. "Mother will fight you on all of this." "Yes, she will," Richard agreed calmly, "which is why I need both of you on board first. Eleanor responds to strength, not sentiment. If we present a united front, she'll eventually adapt." "Eventually" being the operative word, I murmured, thinking of my mother-in-law's formidable will. Richard's smile deepened, a hint of mischief lighting his tired eyes. "Eleanor didn't marry me just for my publishing prospects, you know. Before this heart slowed down, I could be quite stubborn myself when the situation called for it." He reached across the table, taking one of my hands and one of James's. "I let the balance of power shift too far. It's time to restore equilibrium, not just for our sakes, but for Rebecca's, for any grandchildren who might someday join this family. And yes, even for Eleanor herself. She's lost her way, but she's still the woman I love." The simple declaration hung in the air between us, a reminder that beneath the power struggles and family politics, there remained a foundation of genuine affection. I squeezed Richard's hand, moved by his vulnerability and newfound resolve. "What can we do to help?" I asked. "First, Sarah, I'd like you to attend my meeting with Daniel tomorrow. Your perspective is valuable, and I want him to hear directly from both of us." He turned to James. "And son, I need you to take a more active role at Mitchell Media, not just in your division, but at the executive level. It's time you started growing into the leadership role you'll eventually inherit." James nodded slowly. "I've been avoiding that conversation with Mother for years." "I know. She's protective of her authority, especially now. But the company needs fresh perspective, and you've earned the right to provide it." Richard sighed. "This won't be easy for any of us. Eleanor's identity is deeply entwined with her role as the family's guardian. Asking her to loosen her grip feels to her like asking her to abandon her purpose, Then we need to help her find a new purpose, I suggested. One that channels her organizational skills and passion without controlling everyone around her. Richard's eyes lit up. That's precisely the kind of thinking we need. Ideas? We spent the rest of dinner brainstorming possibilities, expanding Mitchell Media's philanthropic initiatives under Eleanor's direction, creating a mentorship program for young women in publishing with Eleanor as its head, even establishing a family foundation separate from the company that she could shape from the ground up. By the time Martha brought coffee and dessert, the outline of a strategy had emerged, one that acknowledged Eleanor's strengths while creating space for others to exercise theirs. Richard looked more energized than I'd seen him in months, engaged and forward-thinking rather than reminiscing about past glories. As we prepared to leave, Richard embraced me with surprising strength. Thank you for fighting for your place. In this family, Sarah, you've done us all a service, whether Eleanor recognizes it yet or not. In the car on the way home, James was uncharacteristically quiet, processing everything his father had shared. Finally, as we pulled into our townhouse driveway, he turned to me. I've never seen Dad like that. So clear-eyed about Mother, so determined to change things. Facing mortality has a way of clarifying priorities, I said, thinking of my own father's transformation after a cancer scare years earlier. He loves your mother, but he loves you and Rebecca too. He doesn't want to leave behind a fractured family. And you? James asked quietly. After everything that's happened, how do you feel about being part of the Mitchell family now? I considered the question carefully. I married you, not your family name or your mother's approval, but I'd rather find a way to be authentically myself within the family than always positioned against it. I squeezed his hand. Your father's offering us a chance to redefine what being a Mitchell means. I think we should take it. The next morning, I met Daniel at his office before heading to our appointment with Richard. He was reviewing notes, his desk uncharacteristically cluttered with Mitchell Media annual reports and family trust documents. Richard called me at 6 a.m., he said by way of greeting. The man is remarkably well-informed for someone who's supposedly been disengaged from family business. I think he's been watching and listening more than anyone realized, I replied, settling into a chair. He sees everything that's wrong with the current family dynamic. And he's prepared to upend decades of tradition to fix it. Daniel shuffled his papers. This meeting isn't just about strengthening the family harmony clause, Sarah. Richard's talking about fundamentally restructuring how the Mitchell family operates, economically, socially, and legally. Is that even possible? The trust has been in place for generations. With the right provisions, yes. The original trust founder, James's great-grandfather, actually built in remarkable flexibility, perhaps anticipating that family needs would evolve over time. It's Eleanor who's been interpreting it narrowly, not the document itself. We continued our discussion on the way to the Mitchell estate, where Richard had asked to meet rather than at Daniel's office. The significance wasn't lost on either of us. This was family business, and Richard was reclaiming his territory. Martha showed us into Richard's study, a wood-paneled sanctuary filled with books and family photographs that I'd only glimpsed from the doorway on previous visits. Richard was at his desk, looking professional despite his casual attire, papers spread before him in organized stacks. "Thank you both for coming," he said, rising to greet us. "I prefer to handle this here, where the family's history surrounds us." He gestured to the photographs on the walls, generations of Mitchells captured at significant moments, the evolution of a legacy in silver frames. Daniel set his briefcase on a side table. "You mentioned restructuring the family trust, Mr. Mitchell. That's quite an undertaking. Call me Richard, please. And yes, it is, but necessary." He indicated chairs for us, then returned to his own. "When my father established this trust, his primary concern was protecting the family's financial interests. Times were different. Then, Women had fewer legal rights. Divorce was scandalous. Extended families often lived together under one roof. The trust reflects those realities. But the underlying principles can be applied to modern circumstances, Daniel observed. Exactly. Richard pulled a document from one of his stacks. This is the original statement of purpose, written in my father's own hand. To nurture the Mitchell family line through changing times, ensuring that each generation finds support for their endeavors while maintaining the bonds of familial loyalty and mutual respect. He looked up at us. Nurture, support, respect, not control, restrict, or alienate. Eleanor would argue she's fulfilling that purpose through her loyalty contracts, I pointed out. She would, and that's the problem. The language allows for multiple interpretations. Richard handed the document to Daniel. I want to amend the trust with specific language that defines healthy family relationships and explicitly prohibits coercive measures like Eleanor's contracts. Daniel reviewed the paper thoughtfully. We can certainly draft such amendments. The question is whether you have unilateral authority to implement them. As the primary trustee, I do, with certain limitations. Family members can challenge amendments they believe violate the trust's original intent, but such challenges are adjudicated by an independent trustee. Richard smiled slightly. Fortunately, that position is currently held by my oldest friend from law school, who has watched Eleanor's controlling tendencies with growing concern for years. The next hour was spent outlining specific amendments, protections for spouses and partners, clearer definitions of family obligations that respected individual autonomy, mechanisms for resolving disputes that didn't place all authority in one person's hands. Richard's legal background was evident in his precise language and thoughtful structure. There's one more element I want to address, he said, as our discussion wound down. The leadership of Mitchell Media itself. Daniel and I exchanged glances. That's separate from the family trust issues, Daniel noted. Yes and no. The trust controls voting shares in the company, which effectively determines board composition and executive appointments. Richard's expression grew more serious. I've allowed Eleanor to consolidate too much control over both the family and the business. It's created a dangerous situation where crossing her in one arena means risking relationships in the other. The consulting arrangement we proposed begins to separate those spheres, I suggested. It does, and it's a good start. But we need to go further. Richard leaned forward, his energy belying his recent health struggles. I'm proposing a significant restructuring of Mitchell Media's executive team. Eleanor will remain CEO, but with a more clearly defined role focused on client relationships and public representation, her strengths. James will be promoted to Chief Operating Officer, with direct authority over day-to-day operations. And we'll create a new position, Chief Digital Officer, with authority to modernize our technological infrastructure and digital strategy. I immediately understood where he was heading. You want me to take that position. I want to offer you that position, Richard corrected. As a legitimate executive role, separate from your consulting business, which you would be free to maintain. This isn't about forcing you into the family business, Sarah. It's about recognizing that you have expertise we desperately need and offering you a meaningful way to contribute that respects your professional identity. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrow, his tell for when something surprised him. That's quite a restructuring. How do you anticipate Eleanor will respond? Poorly, at first, Richard admitted. But I've thought this through. The board already recognizes our digital weaknesses. They've been pushing for outside expertise for months. The Henderson account has highlighted the urgency. And Eleanor herself acknowledged the value of Sarah's input, however reluctantly, by including her recommendations in the final proposal. Timing will be crucial, Daniel observed. Implementing too many changes simultaneously could create unnecessary resistance. Richard nodded. I agree. The trust amendments come first. They establish the new foundation for family relationships. Once those are in place, we'll address the company restructuring. He turned to me. This is contingent. On your interest, of course, Sarah. I won't pressure you into a role you don't want. I considered the proposal carefully. A dedicated executive position focused on digital strategy would allow me to influence Mitchell Media's direction without sacrificing my independence. It would also position me as a professional in my own right within the company, not merely James's wife. I'm interested in exploring it, I said finally, but I'd need guarantees of genuine authority, not a ceremonial title designed to bring me into the fold while limiting my actual influence. Of course, Richard agreed immediately. Daniel can help us draft a position description with clearly defined responsibilities and authority. This isn't a token gesture, Sarah. It's a recognition that Mitchell Media's future depends on evolving beyond the limitations of our traditional approach. Daniel made a note. We should discuss compensation separately to ensure everything is handled at arm's length and avoids any appearance of impropriety. Absolutely. Richard gathered his papers, signaling the end of our formal discussion. One more thing. I've invited Rebecca and Marcus to dinner tomorrow night to discuss these changes. I'd like both of you to attend as well. Eleanor will be there, and I want her to see that this isn't a rebellion against her authority, but a family realignment that includes her in a new way. As Daniel and I prepared to leave, Martha appeared at the study door. Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell has returned. She's asking for you in the main parlor. Richard's expression didn't change, but I noticed his shoulders straighten almost imperceptibly. Thank you, Martha. Please tell her I'll be there shortly after I've concluded my meeting. It was a small assertion of independence, but significant. In a household where Eleanor's summons were typically treated as immediate commands. Martha nodded and withdrew, her eyes registering surprised approval. This is just the beginning, Richard said quietly. The real work starts when Eleanor realizes these changes aren't temporary accommodations, but permanent shifts in how this family operates. He escorted us to the side entrance of the house, away from the main parlor where Eleanor waited. Thank you both for your help. I'll see you tomorrow evening. In the car, Daniel was uncharacteristically silent, processing everything we'd discussed. Finally, as we neared his office, he spoke. Richard Mitchell is an impressive man. I underestimated him. So did Eleanor, I replied. So did we all. He's taking significant risks, with his marriage, with the family business, with generations of established patterns. Daniel glanced at me. Are you prepared for the consequences if this goes sideways? Eleanor won't surrender control easily. I thought about James's newfound willingness to stand up to his mother, about Rebecca and Marcus's solidarity, about Richard's quiet determination to correct course before it was too late. I think we all understand the risks, I said finally. But continuing on the current path isn't an option, not for the business, not for the family relationships, and certainly not for my marriage. Something has to change. Indeed. Daniel pulled into his parking space. Well, tomorrow's dinner should be illuminating. I suggest you prepare yourself for considerable resistance. That was an understatement. As I drove home, I thought, about the forthcoming family dinner, Eleanor would be taken by surprise, confronted with challenges to both her personal authority and her professional role. The potential for conflict was enormous, but so was the potential for healing. Richard wasn't seeking to punish Eleanor or diminish her contributions. He was trying to restore balance to a family system that had tilted dangerously toward control and away from trust. If she could see that, if she could recognize that her value to the family transcended her ability to direct everyone's choices, there was hope for genuine reconciliation. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Mother knows something's up. Dad emerged from his study looking suspiciously energized, according to her. She's interrogating Martha about your visit. Dinner tomorrow will be interesting. I smiled at the understatement. Interesting didn't begin to cover it. But for the first time since receiving that certified letter with its demands for loyalty, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Not just my place in the Mitchell family, but the family's ability to evolve without fracturing. Whether Eleanor would share that optimism remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The days of loyalty contracts and unilateral decisions were over. Whatever came next would be built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine choice. The only kind of loyalty worth having. The golden pair was unusually quiet when I met Rebecca the next afternoon, a lull between the lunch rush and after-work crowd providing a rare pocket of privacy in the normally bustling cafe. She was already waiting in a corner booth, 2 lattes on the table, and an expectant gleam in her eye that reminded me of James when he was onto a good story. "Finally!" she exclaimed as I slid into the seat across from her. "I've been dying to talk to someone who isn't completely terrified of Mother." She pushed one of the lattes toward me. "Extra shot? Almond milk? No sweetener." "You remembered my order," I said, touched by the small gesture of kinship. "Of course I did. We outsiders have to stick together." Rebecca's self-deprecating smile softened the words. Despite being born into the Mitchell family, she'd always felt like something of an outsider herself, too creative for her mother's corporate ambitions, too independent for the traditional role Eleanor had envisioned for her daughter. "How much do you know about what's happening?" I asked, warming my hands around the ceramic mug. Rebecca leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the empty tables around us. "I know Dad met with you and your lawyer yesterday. I know he's amending the family trust. And I know he's invited us all to dinner tonight for what Mother's calling an unnecessary family summit." Her eyes sparkled with suppressed excitement. "He's really doing it, isn't he? Standing up to her after all these years?" I nodded, surprised by how much Rebecca already knew. "Your father is remarkable. He always was, before his heart attack anyway." A shadow crossed her expressive face. After that, it was like he just surrendered. Let Mother take control of everything because fighting seemed too exhausting. She took a sip of her latte, studying me over the rim. What changed? I considered how much to share, deciding on honesty. "I think seeing your mother's loyalty contract woke something in him. The idea that his family had become so dysfunctional that spouses needed legal constraints rather than trust. It horrified him." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Dad built Mitchell Media as a family legacy, but Mother turned it into a fortress. The more successful it became, the higher she built the walls." She hesitated, then asked, "Did he tell you about the position he's creating?" Now it was my turn to be surprised. "You know about that too?" "Chief Digital Officer." Rebecca grinned. "Dad called me this morning to get my thoughts. He knows I've been pushing for digital innovation for years." Her expression grew more serious. "It's perfect for you, Sarah. You'd have genuine authority, not just a courtesy title." "I'm considering it," I admitted. "But there's something I need to know first." I met her gaze directly. "Is this a real opportunity, or just a way to bring me into the fold where I can be more easily controlled?" Rebecca didn't hesitate. "It's real. The company desperately needs your expertise, and Dad knows it. Mother knows it too, though she'd rather die than admit it." She reached across the table, an unusual gesture from someone typically as reserved as her brother. "This isn't about control, Sarah. It's about salvation, for the company and for our family. Your mother won't see it that way." "No," Rebecca agreed with a wry smile. "She'll see it as a coup, which, in a way, it is. Just not the kind she's imagining." She glanced at her watch. "Speaking of Mother, I should warn you about tonight. She's been making calls all morning. Board members, family, friends, even her therapist. She knows something significant is coming, and she's marshaling her forces. Her therapist? I couldn't hide my surprise. Eleanor had always dismissed therapy as fashionable hand-holding for the weak-minded. Dr. Winters, she's been seeing him secretly for months, since Dad's heart attack. None of us were supposed to know. Rebecca smirked. But Mother's assistant is dating my friend Thomas, and well, Oak Ridge isn't as big as Mother likes to pretend. This revelation cast Eleanor in a new light, a woman struggling privately while maintaining a facade of perfect control. I wasn't sure whether it made me more sympathetic toward her or more concerned about her reaction to Richard's proposed changes. "What about James?" Rebecca asked, changing the subject. "How is he handling all this? He's always been caught in the middle. Mother's golden boy and your husband." "He's finding his voice," I said simply. "Standing up to your mother wasn't easy for him, but I think he's realizing it was necessary, not just for our marriage, but for his own growth." "Good." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "James has always had more spine than Mother gave him credit for. He just needed the right motivation to show it." She finished her latte and set the cup down with a decisive clink. "Well, I'd better go prepare Marcus for tonight's festivities. He's terrified of formal family dinners in the best of circumstances. This one might give him an ulcer." As we parted outside the cafe, Rebecca surprised me with a quick, fierce hug. "Whatever happens tonight," she whispered, "know that you've already changed this family for the better. Some of us have been waiting years for someone brave enough to challenge the status quo." Her words stayed with me as I drove to my afternoon client meeting, a welcome boost of confidence before the evening's confrontation. Whatever doubts I'd harbored about whether I was overstepping by involving myself in Mitchell family governance were eased by Rebecca's wholehearted support. This wasn't just about protecting my marriage or my career. It was about helping a family I'd come to care for find a healthier way forward. James called as I was leaving my client's office. "Dad's asked me to come home early to review some documents before dinner," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "He's actually showing me the proposed trust amendments and company restructuring plans." "That's significant," I observed, remembering how Richard had always kept James at arm's length from major family decisions, deferring to Eleanor's assessment that he wasn't ready for such responsibility. "It feels like—" James paused, searching for words. "Like he's finally seeing me as a partner rather than a successor in waiting. Someone whose input matters now, not just someday in the distant future." The wonder in his voice made my heart ache for all the years he'd spent seeking his parents' approval while never quite feeling he'd earned it. "You deserve this, James. You've more than proven yourself." "We both have," he replied warmly. "I'll see you at the house at 7? "I'll be there." I hesitated, then added, "James, whatever happens tonight with your mother, we'll face it together," he finished for me. "As a team, the way we should have been all along." The sentiment carried me through the rest of my afternoon as I prepared for the evening ahead. I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that projected professionalism without aggression, paired with a silk blouse in a soft blue that Eleanor had once grudgingly complimented. My grandmother's pearls completed the ensemble, a touch of personal heritage to remind me of my own family's strength. Daniel met me at the entrance to the Mitchell estate, his presence another statement about the evening's significance. "Ready for this?" he asked as we walked up the immaculate stone path to the main entrance. "As ready as I'll ever be," I admitted. "Eleanor's been preparing all day, according to Rebecca." "Good," Daniel said, surprising me. At my questioning look, he explained, "When people over-prepare, they tend to plan for scenarios that fit their expectations. What's coming tonight doesn't fit any scenario Eleanor Mitchell has imagined. The surprise will work to our advantage. Martha welcomed us at the door with unusual warmth, taking our coats and informing us that the family is gathering in the main parlor before dinner. Her emphasis on the family, including me, felt deliberate, a small but meaningful show of support. The main parlor was Mitchell grandeur at its most intimidating. Soaring ceilings, ancestral portraits, antique furniture arranged for impressive display rather than comfortable conversation. Eleanor stood near the fireplace in a tailored burgundy dress that emphasized her still elegant figure, speaking quietly to a silver-haired man I recognized as Thomas Bradford, the Mitchell Media Board chairman. Richard sat in his favorite leather chair, engaged in conversation with James and Rebecca, while Marcus hovered nervously near a side table laden with drinks. Eleanor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as Daniel and I entered, the only sign that our arrival had disrupted her composure. "Sarah, dear," she called, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. "And Mr. Cohen. What an unexpected pleasure." "Not unexpected at all, Eleanor," Richard replied before I could respond. "I specifically invited Daniel to join us. These family discussions will have legal implications we'll all want to understand clearly." The room fell silent at his direct contradiction of his wife, a rare occurrence in the carefully choreographed dynamics of Mitchell family gatherings. Eleanor's smile remained fixed, but a flush crept up her neck, betraying her surprise. "Of course," she recovered smoothly. "How thoughtful, Richard. Mr. Bradford was just leaving. An unfortunate prior engagement." "Actually," Richard interrupted again, rising from his chair with deliberate care, "I asked Thomas to stay for the beginning of our family discussion. As board chairman, he should be aware of the changes we're considering." The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Eleanor's eyes darted between her husband and the board chairman, calculating rapidly. "Changes? To Mitchell Media? Surely any significant operational decisions would come through me first, as CEO." "Under normal circumstances, yes," Richard agreed mildly. "But these circumstances are far from normal, as your loyalty contract initiative demonstrated." The direct reference to the controversial contracts in front of the board chairman was a power move no one had anticipated, least of all Eleanor, whose composure visibly faltered. Thomas Bradford's eyebrows rose in polite inquiry, his gaze swinging between husband and wife with newfound interest. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Eleanor suggested, her tone hardening beneath its social veneer. "No." Richard's response was firm, but not unkind. "We've had quite enough privacy in this family. Too many decisions made in isolation, too many assumptions about what others think or need." He gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we move to dinner? Martha has everything prepared, and we have much to discuss." The dining room continued the Mitchell home's theme of understated opulence, a gleaming mahogany table that could seat 20 comfortably, now set for an intimate gathering of 7. Richard took his place at the head of the table, a position Eleanor had quietly usurped during his convalescence. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor seated herself at the opposite end, leaving the rest of us to arrange ourselves along the sides. I found myself between James and Daniel, directly across from Rebecca and Marcus, with Thomas Bradford at Eleanor's right hand. Martha supervised the serving of the first course, a delicate soup that steamed fragrant in hand-painted bowls, before withdrawing with a discreet nod to Richard. The message was clear. The staff would be scarce tonight, affording us privacy for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Richard waited until everyone had taken a few bites before setting down his spoon with deliberate care. "I've asked you all here tonight because the Mitchell family stands at a crossroads," he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "Recent events have made it clear that our current approach to family governance is not sustainable." Eleanor set down her soup spoon with more force than necessary. "Richard, surely this can wait until after dinner. Mr. Bradford didn't come here for a family therapy session." On the contrary, Thomas Bradford interjected smoothly. As board chairman, I'm very interested in how Mitchell family dynamics affect company operations. The loyalty contracts you mentioned, for instance, I wasn't aware of any such initiative. Eleanor's expression tightened. It was a family matter, not a company issue. Yet it involved the spouses of Mitchell Media executives, Richard pointed out, including our daughter-in-law Sarah, whose digital expertise you've relied upon, despite refusing her a formal role in the company. Bradford's gaze shifted to me with new interest. You're the consultant behind the Henderson digital strategy? The board was quite impressed with that presentation. Before I could respond, Eleanor cut in. Sarah has provided occasional input on projects of interest to her. Hardly a formal consultation. 37 separate strategic recommendations in the past year, James said quietly. All implemented, all successful. The Henderson proposal was just the most recent example. The precision of the number hung in the air between us. James had been keeping track of my contributions all along, I realized, quietly documenting my impact even as his mother minimized it. Richard seized the moment. Which brings us to the first of the changes I want to discuss tonight. Mitchell Media's future depends on our ability to evolve digitally. We've relied on piecemeal expertise for too long. He nodded to Bradford. The board has been pushing for a more comprehensive approach, as you well know, Thomas. Indeed, Bradford agreed. The digital gap is our most significant vulnerability as a company. To address this, Richard continued, I'm proposing the creation of a new executive position, Chief Digital Officer, with full authority over our technological infrastructure and digital strategy development. Eleanor's spine stiffened. We don't need another executive. Our current team cannot meet the demands of a rapidly evolving marketplace, Richard finished for her. Our quarterly results show it, the Henderson account exposed it, and the board has acknowledged it. Turned to me. I'm offering this position to Sarah, whose expertise is precisely what we need at this critical juncture. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's expressions cycled through shock, anger, and calculation so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching closely. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously controlled. You want to appoint our daughter-in-law, who has repeatedly declined to join the family business, to an executive position with authority equal to my own? Without consulting me, the CEO? With authorities clearly delineated and distinct from yours, Richard clarified. Your strengths are in client relationships and public representation. Sarah's are in digital innovation and implementation. There's no overlap that creates conflict, unless you choose to manufacture one. The directness of his assessment left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Thomas Bradford filled the silence with a thoughtful nod. It's an elegant solution to a pressing problem, he observed. Mrs. Mitchell has the expertise we need and already understands our company culture. And keeping the position in the family maintains the Mitchell tradition while modernizing our approach. He glanced at Eleanor. The board would likely view this favorably, Eleanor. We've been pushing for stronger digital leadership for some time. Eleanor's gaze flicked to me, then back to her husband. And if I object? You're welcome to present your objections to the board, Richard replied evenly. But I believe they'll find the business case compelling. He softened his tone slightly. This isn't about diminishing your role, Eleanor. It's about strengthening the company for the future, the legacy we've built together. The appeal to their shared heritage seemed to reach her, if only barely. Her posture relaxed fractionally as Martha returned to clear the soup course and serve the main dish. Beef Wellington, Richard's favorite, another subtle indication of the evening's power shift. We'll discuss the details of this. Proposition later, Eleanor conceded, clearly unwilling to continue the battle in front of the board chairman. What other changes are you planning to announce tonight? Richard accepted the temporary truce with a nod. The more significant matter concerns the Mitchell family trust and its governance. He turned to Bradford. This portion of our discussion is purely family business, Thomas. I appreciate your presence for the company matters, but— Say no more. Bradford rose smoothly, napkin placed precisely beside his barely touched plate. Eleanor, Richard, thank you for including me. I look forward to hearing more about the CDO position as details are finalized. He shook hands with Richard, nodded to the rest of us, and showed himself out with the confidence of someone who'd visited the Mitchell home countless times. With the external witness gone, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted palpably. Eleanor abandoned any pretense of composure, her voice sharp with barely contained fury. Really, Richard? Ambushing me in front of the board chairman? What happened to our agreement to present a united front on company matters? The same thing that happened to our agreement to make family decisions together, Richard replied calmly. It was disregarded when inconvenient. He turned to Daniel. Mr. Cohen, would you please distribute the documents we prepared? Daniel produced several folders from his briefcase, passing them around the table. Each contained a summary of the proposed trust amendments, written in clear language rather than legal jargon. As everyone reviewed the contents, Eleanor's expression darkened further. This is outrageous, she finally declared, slapping her folder closed. You're proposing to fundamentally alter the trust that has protected this family for generations, all because of one misunderstanding? A misunderstanding that led Claire and Trevor to separate? Rebecca interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. A misunderstanding that had you trying to control every aspect of our lives, right? Down to who we could marry and how we could work? I was protecting this family. Eleanor's composure finally cracked, raw emotion bleeding through. Everything I've done, everything, has been to preserve what your father and I built together, to ensure that the Mitchell legacy continues for your children and their children. At what cost, Eleanor? Richard asked quietly. A legacy of control and fear? Of family members who comply but resent it? Is that really what you want to leave behind? For the first time that evening, Eleanor seemed genuinely taken aback, as if this perspective had never occurred to her. She looked around the table slowly, at Rebecca's defiant expression, at Marcus's careful neutrality, at James's determined face, at my attentive stillness, at Daniel's professional calm, and finally back to her husband. You've all discussed this without me, she said, an unexpected vulnerability entering her voice. You've made these plans, prepared these documents, aligned against me, all while I thought we were working toward the same goals. We are working toward the same goals, Richard insisted. A strong family, a thriving company, a meaningful legacy. We only differ on how to achieve them. By removing me from decisions I've managed for decades? By ensuring that no one person, not you, not me, not anyone, has unilateral control over this family's future. Richard tapped the document before him. These amendments establish a family council where all adult members have a voice. They explicitly prohibit coercive measures like loyalty contracts, and they create transparent processes for resolving disputes without threatening anyone's place in the family. Eleanor turned to James, a new strategy emerging. And you support this? Diluting the very trust that will someday secure your children's future? I support creating a healthier family dynamic for those children to grow up in, James replied steadily. One where they'll be valued for who they are, not just for how well they conform to Mitchell traditions. Rebecca. Eleanor shifted, her attention to her daughter, who had always been her most vocal critic, but also, perhaps, the family member who most resembled her in determination. You know where I stand, Mother. Rebecca's voice was gentler than her words. I've been asking for these kinds of changes since I was 18. Eleanor's gaze finally settled on me, her expression unreadable. I suppose I have you to thank for this family revolution, Sarah. I didn't start this, I said carefully. I only refused to participate in a system that demanded my autonomy as the price of acceptance. I held her gaze. We can both love this family, Eleanor, without agreeing on how to express that love. Something flickered in her eyes. Not surrender, exactly, but perhaps the first hint of reluctant recognition. She turned back to Richard, who had watched the exchanges with patient attention. You've clearly made up your mind, she said, her voice flat, and secured the necessary allies to implement these changes regardless of my objections. That's not entirely accurate, Richard replied. While I do have the authority as primary trustee to amend the trust, I would prefer to do so with your support. These changes don't diminish your importance to this family, Eleanor. They simply create space for others to contribute in their own ways. And the company position for Sarah? Is that also non-negotiable? The business case is solid, Richard said, but the specifics of the role, its scope, reporting structure, integration with existing teams, those are open for discussion. He glanced at me. Sarah has made it clear she won't accept a position without genuine authority, but I believe we can structure it in a way that complements your leadership rather than challenging it. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving from face to face around the table. Whatever she saw there seemed to shift something in her calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its edge. I need time to review these proposals properly, and to consult with my own advisors. She looked directly at Daniel. I assume you'd have no objection to my seeking independent legal counsel on these matters? None whatsoever, Daniel replied smoothly. In fact, I'd encourage it. These decisions affect the entire family and should be approached with full understanding from all parties. Eleanor nodded once, then turned to Richard. I'll give you my response in 3 days. Until then, I would appreciate if no further actions are taken regarding either the trust amendments or the company restructuring. It was a classic Eleanor negotiating tactic, acknowledging the inevitability of change while buying time to influence its direction. Richard recognized it immediately, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 days is reasonable, he agreed. But I should inform you that the independent trustee has already been briefed on the proposed amendments and found them consistent with the trust's foundational principles. Any substantive objections would need to address that assessment. Eleanor's lips thinned, but she inclined her head in acknowledgement of the gentle checkmate. Understood. She rose from her seat, dinner barely touched. If you'll excuse me, I find I have a headache coming on. Please enjoy the rest of the meal. She left the dining room with her characteristic grace, back straight and head high despite the significant defeat she'd just suffered. As the door closed behind her, a collective breath seemed to release around the table. Well, Rebecca said into the silence, that went better than expected. At least no one got stabbed with a dessert fork. The tension broke, nervous laughter, rippling around the table. Richard shook his head in fond exasperation at his daughter's gallows humor, then turned to Daniel. What do you think? Will she fight us on this? Daniel considered the question with his usual care. She'll certainly try to modify elements that she finds most objectionable, but outright opposition seems unlikely given the board chairman's positive reaction to the CDO position and the independent trustee's preliminary approval of the trust amendments. He glanced toward the door Eleanor had exited through. Mrs. Mitchell is a strategic thinker. She knows when to cut her losses and focus on shaping what she can't prevent. That's my wife, Richard agreed, a complex mixture of exasperation and admiration in his tone. Always 3 moves ahead, even in retreat. He raised his wine glass. To family honesty, however uncomfortable it might be. We all drank to the toast, the atmosphere shifting toward cautious optimism. As Martha returned to serve dessert, a chocolate soufflé that Eleanor would normally have supervised personally. I found myself considering the evening's unexpected developments. Eleanor's request for time to review the proposals wasn't just a delaying tactic, it was also an acknowledgement that change was coming, whether she welcomed it or not. Her focus now would be on shaping that change to preserve as much of her influence as possible. 3 days, James murmured beside me, his thoughts clearly running parallel to mine. What do you think she'll do? Exactly what Daniel suggested, I replied quietly. Accept what she can't change, fight for modifications where she can, and look for ways to define the new reality in terms that still give her purpose and authority. And you'd be okay with that? Working with her at Mitchell Media after everything that's happened? I considered the question seriously. If the role is meaningful and my authority is real? Yes. Your mother and I will never be best friends, but we could be effective colleagues if the boundaries are clear. I squeezed his hand under the table. Besides, if these amendments go through, I'll have more than just my professional reputation protecting me. I'll have structural support from the family itself. James nodded slowly. It's strange to think of our family operating by formal rules and counsels rather than Mother's force of will, but also liberating. Across the table, Rebecca and Marcus had fallen into conversation with Richard, discussing potential improvements to the family's charitable foundation, another area where Eleanor had traditionally exercised unilateral control. Daniel observed them with professional interest, occasionally offering a clarifying point about legal structures. The scene struck me as a preview of the Mitchell family's possible future. More collaborative, more transparent, with space for multiple voices and perspectives. Whether Eleanor would find her place in this new reality remained to be seen, but the framework being established would make it possible for her to do so without dominating everyone around her. As the evening drew to a close, Richard walked us to the door, his energy remarkably sustained despite the emotional intensity of the dinner. Thank you all for your support tonight, he said, embracing James and me together. This is only the beginning, but it's a beginning I've been working toward for longer than you know. On the drive home, James was thoughtful, processing everything that had transpired. I've never seen Dad so purposeful, he observed. It's like he's reclaiming parts of himself that disappeared years ago. Your father is a remarkable man, I agreed. To recognize what needs changing in a system he helped create that takes unusual courage and humility. Do you think Mother will ever see it that way? I considered the question carefully. I think part of her already does. That's why she's retreated to regroup rather than continuing to fight tonight. The question is whether she can find a way forward that satisfies her need for purpose without controlling everyone around her. James nodded slowly. Dad once told me that Mother's greatest strength and greatest weakness are the same thing. Her absolute certainty that she knows what's best for everyone she loves. Breaking that pattern won't be easy for her. No, I agreed. But it's necessary, for her as much as for the rest of you. As we pulled into our townhouse driveway, James took my hand. Whatever happens with Mother, whatever she proposes after these 3 days, I want you to know that I'm with you. No more caught in the middle, no more divided loyalties. We face this together. I leaned across to kiss him, feeling a deeper connection than we'd shared in months. Together, I agreed. That's the only loyalty contract I'll ever need. The 3 days Eleanor had requested passed with unusual quietness. No calls, no texts, no impromptu visits to our townhouse, a stark contrast to her typically omnipresent influence in our lives. James reported that she'd been absent from Mitchell Media offices as well, delegating her meetings to senior staff while she worked from home. The building feels different, he observed over breakfast on the 3rd morning. People are talking more freely, making decisions without constantly looking over their shoulders for Mother's approval. Is that good or bad for operations? I asked, genuinely curious about the impact of Eleanor's temporary retreat. James considered this as he refilled his coffee cup. Both, honestly. There's more creativity, more open discussion of new ideas, but also some confusion about priorities and lines of authority. He smiled ruefully. Mother may be controlling, but she's also incredibly efficient. The company will need to find a new balance, I suggested. Structure without strangulation. That's a perfect way to put it. James glanced at his watch. Mother's requested a meeting with Dad at the house this afternoon. I'm not invited, but Rebecca is. This was surprising. Eleanor typically included James in all significant family discussions, viewing him as her natural ally. Why Rebecca and not you? Dad thinks she's trying to drive a wedge between us, get Rebecca on her side by making her feel specially chosen. He shook his head. If that's her strategy, she seriously misread the situation. Rebecca's been waiting years for these changes. I wasn't so sure. Eleanor was nothing if not shrewd about human dynamics. Or she knows exactly how Rebecca feels and is counting on your sister's natural contrarianism. If everyone expects Rebecca to oppose her, maybe the quickest way to get Rebecca reconsidering is to make her feel like she's now the insider while you're excluded. James blinked, then laughed. That's disturbingly plausible. I should call Becca, warn her. I wouldn't, I cautioned. Rebecca's smart. Treating her like she needs to be protected from your mother's manipulation would play right into Eleanor's hands. Trust your sister to recognize the tactics for what they are. He nodded slowly. You're right. Becca would hate being warned, off like she's vulnerable to mother's influence. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. I need to get to the office. The Henderson team is coming in for a progress update, and I want to review the presentation before they arrive. As he gathered his things, I asked the question that had been lingering since our confrontation with Eleanor. What do you think your mother will propose today? Some kind of counteroffer to Richard's amendments? James paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. That would be the logical move. But with Mother, he shook his head. She hates being predictable almost as much as she hates being outmaneuvered. Whatever she's planning, it won't be what any of us expect. His assessment proved prescient. Shortly after 2:00, my phone rang with Rebecca's number. Are you sitting down? She asked without preamble, her voice a mixture of shock and grudging admiration. I am now, I replied, settling onto the couch in my home office. What happened? Mother just proposed a complete restructuring of Mitchell Media's executive leadership. The words tumbled out in a rush. She wants to step down as CEO. I nearly dropped my phone. What? I know, right? Dad looked like someone had hit him with a brick. Even Daniel seemed shocked, and that man has the emotional range of a statue. Wait, Daniel was there? This was another surprise. Richard must have anticipated a significant legal discussion to have invited my attorney. Mother insisted he attend, Rebecca explained. Said she wanted everyone to fully understand the legal implications of her proposal. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this unexpected development. What exactly did she propose? A 3-phase leadership transition. Phase 1. She steps down as CEO but remains as board chair, with Dad returning as interim CEO while the company conducts an executive search. Phase 2. A new CEO is appointed from outside the family, with a clear mandate to modernize operations. Phase 3. Creation of a family office separate from day-to-day company operations, focused on preserving the Mitchell legacy through philanthropy and community engagement. It was a breathtakingly comprehensive proposal, and notably absent was any mention of my potential role as Chief Digital Officer. What about the family trust amendments? I asked. That's the truly wild part, Rebecca replied, her voice dropping, as if someone might overhear despite being on a private call. She's agreed to all of them. Every single one. With one addition. a clause defining the purpose and authority of the new family office, which she would head. The pieces clicked into place. Eleanor wasn't surrendering, she was strategically repositioning. By stepping away from company operations and creating a separate sphere of influence, she was effectively preserving her authority over the Mitchell family legacy, while appearing to embrace the changes Richard had proposed. "What did your father say?" "He's considering it. Called for a recess so he could review the full proposal with Daniel." Rebecca paused. "Sarah, I think this might actually be brilliant. Mother gets to save face while giving us most of what we wanted. The company gets professional management. The family gets democratic governance. And Mother gets a role that channels her organizational skills into something positive instead of controlling." It did sound promising, almost too much so. "And what about the chief digital officer position Richard proposed for me?" "Still on the table, but reporting to the new CEO, not to Mother. She thinks it should be filled through a formal search process to avoid any appearance of nepotism. But Dad pushed back pretty hard on that. Said your qualifications were exceptional regardless of your family connection." I absorbed this information, turning it over from different angles. Eleanor's counterproposal was clever, addressing the core issues while protecting her influence and dignity. And the suggestion that my position should go through a formal search process wasn't entirely unreasonable, especially if the company was transitioning to more professional management. "What do you think about all this?" I asked. Rebecca, curious about her perspective as someone who had clashed with Eleanor more openly than most. "Honestly, I think Mother outplayed us all." There was reluctant respect in Rebecca's voice. She saw where this was heading and got out ahead of it. Instead of fighting a losing battle to maintain control of Mitchell Media, she's created a new domain where her skills are still valued. And by agreeing to the trust amendments, she looks magnanimous rather than defeated. "Do you trust it?" I pressed. "This sudden reversal?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering. "I trust that Mother recognizes reality when she sees it. The company needs professional management. The family needs democratic governance. And she needs purpose and authority to be happy. This gives her all three without requiring her to directly manage either of us or our careers." It made sense, albeit in a distinctly Eleanor Mitchell fashion, pragmatic, strategic, and designed to preserve her influence in altered circumstances. "There's one more thing," Rebecca added, her tone shifting. "Dad wants you to join the discussion when they reconvene at 4. Daniel suggested it, actually. Said that since your professional future is part of the negotiation, you should have direct input." This invitation represented a significant evolution in my status within the Mitchell family, from outsider to stakeholder, from James's wife to a principal in my own right. "I'll be there," I promised. After hanging up with Rebecca, I called Daniel for his assessment of the situation. "It's a calculated retreat," he confirmed when I outlined my initial thoughts. "Mrs. Mitchell is too shrewd to fight a battle she can't win. By proposing this restructuring herself, she maintains agency in the process." "Do you think it's genuine? Or just a new strategy for maintaining control?" "Both," Daniel replied, after a thoughtful pause. "She's genuinely recognized that Mitchell Media needs professional management beyond family capabilities. But she's also creating a new power center with the family office, where her particular skills can be deployed, without resistance. And the trust amendments, her sudden acceptance seems suspiciously convenient." "Actually, that may be the most genuine part of her proposal," Daniel said, surprising me. "The proposed family office would give her a defined role within the new governance structure. She's essentially trading unilateral control for formal authority in a narrower domain. A rational compromise from her perspective." I considered this analysis as I prepared for the 4 o'clock meeting, choosing a professional but approachable outfit that would convey confidence without aggression. Arriving at the Mitchell estate, I found the atmosphere noticeably different. from our previous confrontational dinner. Less tension, more purposeful energy. Martha showed me to Richard's study, where the earlier discussion had taken place. Eleanor sat beside Richard's desk rather than across from it, a subtle but significant positioning that suggested partnership rather than opposition. Rebecca occupied a comfortable chair near the window, while Daniel stood reviewing documents at a side table. "Sarah," Richard greeted me warmly, rising to welcome me. "Thank you for joining us. Eleanor has made a rather comprehensive proposal that affects all of us, including you." I nodded to Richard, then turned to Eleanor with professional courtesy. "It sounds like you've been giving these matters a great deal of thought." "Indeed." Eleanor's tone was crisp, but not hostile, the voice she used for business discussions rather than family conflicts. "Current circumstances require adaptation, not entrenchment. I've simply proposed the most efficient path forward." It was as close to an acknowledgement of changed realities as we were likely to get from her. I took the seat Richard indicated, completing our circle of 5. "I've reviewed Eleanor's proposal," Richard began, "and found much to recommend it. The company would benefit from professional management with specialized expertise. The family would benefit from more democratic governance. And the Mitchell legacy would be preserved through a dedicated family office." He looked to Daniel. "Mr. Cohen has reviewed the legal aspects and found them sound. The question now is whether this arrangement serves everyone's interests, including yours, Sarah." Eleanor spoke before I could respond. "I should clarify one point regarding the Chief Digital Officer position. I'm not opposed to Sarah taking this role. Her qualifications are evident in her work with the Henderson account. My concern is ensuring that whoever fills this position has the necessary authority to be effective, which requires clear reporting relationships in the new structure." It was a remarkably reasonable statement from someone who had recently tried to bind me with a loyalty contract. I studied Eleanor's composed expression, looking for signs of hidden agenda, but finding only calculated pragmatism. "I appreciate that clarification," I said carefully. "My interest has always been in making a meaningful contribution that leverages my expertise while respecting my professional autonomy." "Precisely," Eleanor nodded, "which is why I've suggested that this position report directly to the new CEO, rather than through existing management channels. Clean lines of authority are essential for successful implementation of digital transformation." Daniel caught my eye from across the room, a subtle signal that this concession was significant. Eleanor was acknowledging not only my expertise, but also the need for my role to have independent authority, a major shift from her previous attempts to subordinate my career to family control. "The family office concept is also intriguing," I continued, addressing the heart of Eleanor's counter-proposal. "It creates a dedicated space for preserving the Mitchell legacy while allowing the company to evolve under professional management." Eleanor's expression warmed fractionally at my recognition of her strategy. "The Mitchell name stands for more than just publishing and marketing," she said, passion entering her voice for the first time. "It represents a commitment to this community, to philanthropy, to excellence. Those values should be nurtured deliberately, not left as an afterthought to business operations." Looking at her in that moment, poised, articulate, deeply committed to the legacy she'd helped build, I understood more clearly why Richard had fallen in love with her decades ago, and why, despite her controlling tendencies, the Mitchell family continued to revolve around her forceful personality. Eleanor Mitchell was problematic in many ways, but her dedication to her family's legacy was genuine and profound. "I think the family office is an excellent idea," I said sincerely. "It leverages your organizational skills and community connections in service of something meaningful to all of us." A flicker of surprise crossed Eleanor's features, quickly masked by professional composure. She hadn't expected my sincere support, I realized, had prepared for resistance, negotiation, subtle combat. My authentic endorsement had momentarily disrupted her tactical thinking. "Thank you," she said simply. "I believe it's the right solution for everyone concerned." Richard leaned forward, seizing the moment of unexpected accord. "Then let's formalize these arrangements. Daniel has prepared an initial framework incorporating Eleanor's proposal with our previous discussions." He nodded to my attorney, who distributed folders to each of us. "This document outlines 3 key agreements," Daniel explained as we reviewed the contents. "First, the amendments to the family trust establishing more democratic governance. Second, the leadership transition plan for Mitchell Media, including the creation of the Chief Digital Officer position. Third, the establishment of the Mitchell Family Office as a separate entity focused on legacy preservation and philanthropic initiatives." As I scanned the document, I was impressed by how thoroughly Daniel had integrated Eleanor's proposal with Richard's original intentions. The trust amendments remained intact, ensuring family members couldn't be coerced through loyalty contracts or similar measures. The company restructuring now included a professional CEO search with clear timelines, and the family office provisions gave Eleanor meaningful authority without veto power over other family members' decisions. "This is quite comprehensive," I observed. "It addresses all the key concerns while creating a sustainable framework for moving forward." "Indeed," Richard agreed. "Eleanor and I have reviewed it together and believe it represents a workable compromise that serves everyone's interests." He turned to Rebecca. "Your thoughts, Becca?" Rebecca had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the discussion, observing the dynamics with careful attention. Now she straightened in her chair, addressing her response to both parents equally. "I think it's remarkable," she said with genuine admiration. "A month ago, we were a family fracturing under the weight of control and resentment. Now we're designing a structure that respects everyone's autonomy while preserving what matters most about the Mitchell legacy." She smiled at her mother with unexpected warmth. "It took courage to propose this restructuring, Mother. Real leadership." Eleanor's composure wavered momentarily, genuine emotion breaking through her carefully maintained facade. "I simply recognized what was necessary," she said, her voice slightly rougher than usual. "As I should have done sooner." The acknowledgement, however oblique, of her past rigidity created a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. Richard reached over to cover Eleanor's hand with his own, a gesture of reconciliation that she accepted with the slightest nod. "If we're all in agreement," Daniel said, breaking the emotional moment with professional courtesy, "I'll prepare the final documents for signature. The trust amendments will take effect immediately upon filing. The company restructuring and family office establishment will be implemented according to the timeline outlined in Section 3. "One additional point," Eleanor said, her business demeanor reasserting itself. "Sarah's position as Chief Digital Officer. I believe we should formalize this appointment before the CEO search begins to ensure the role is properly integrated into the new leadership structure." It was a significant concession, acknowledging not only my qualifications but the importance of establishing my authority before new executive leadership was in place. Richard looked to me, clearly leaving the response in my hands. "I appreciate that," I said, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. "I'd like to review the position description in detail and discuss reporting relationships, budget authority, and team structure before accepting formally. But in principle, yes, I'm interested in taking on this role." Eleanor nodded once, businesslike but not unfriendly. "I'll have HR prepare the necessary documentation. Perhaps we could meet next week to discuss the specifics." "I'd be happy to," I agreed, matching her professional tone. It wasn't friendship or even warm accommodation, but it was respect, a foundation we could potentially build upon. As the meeting concluded, Martha appeared with tea and sandwiches, a homey touch that seemed to symbolize the shift from confrontation to collaboration. Eleanor excused herself briefly to take a call, while Richard, Rebecca, and I settled into more comfortable chairs near the study's fireplace. "Well?" Rebecca said once her mother was out of earshot. "That was decidedly not how I expected this to go." Richard chuckled. "Your mother has always been capable of surprising tactical shifts. It's one of the qualities that made her such an effective business partner all these years." "And a formidable opponent," I added, earning a knowing smile from my father-in-law. "Indeed, though I prefer to think of her as a formidable ally who occasionally required course correction." His expression grew more serious. "This is a significant transition for her, Sarah. The company has been her primary focus for decades. Creating this new role for herself, it's an act of remarkable adaptation." I understood what he was asking without him having to spell it out. Could I work with Eleanor professionally after our personal conflicts? Could I see beyond her past attempts to control me to the capable, dedicated woman beneath the controlling behaviors? "I think we can build a productive working relationship," I said carefully, "especially with clear boundaries and defined authorities." "Good," Richard nodded, satisfied. "Because despite all her flaws, Eleanor brings exceptional value to anything she undertakes. The family office will flourish under her direction, and Mitchell Media will benefit from her continued association, albeit in a different capacity." Eleanor returned as we were discussing timeline details, seamlessly rejoining the conversation without disrupting its collaborative tone. When Daniel excused himself to make some calls regarding the final documentation, she surprised me by suggesting we take a brief walk in the garden. "The fresh air helps me think," she explained, leading me toward the rear doors that opened onto the Mitchell estate's meticulously maintained grounds. "And we should talk privately, I think." The garden was Eleanor's domain as much as the house itself, every plant placed with deliberate intention, every view carefully composed. As we walked along a gravel path bordered by late-blooming perennials, I waited for her to reveal the purpose of this unexpected tête-à-tête. "You handled yourself well in there," she said finally, nodding back toward the house. "Professional, strategic, focused on outcomes rather than emotions." Coming from Eleanor, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you. I could say the same about your restructuring proposal." A faint smile touched her lips. "Necessity is a powerful motivator." I could see which way the wind was blowing. She paused near a stone bench, though she didn't sit. "Richard thinks I've had some grand epiphany about my controlling tendencies. The truth is simpler. I'm pragmatic. Fighting these changes would damage the family and the company I've spent my life building." "That's still wisdom," I observed, "recognizing when adaptation serves your core values better than resistance." Eleanor studied me with new interest. "You understand that, don't you? The difference between surrendering and strategically repositioning." "I was an investigative journalist," I reminded her. "I learned to recognize when a frontal assault would fail and a flanking maneuver might succeed." "Precisely." For the first time since I'd known her, Eleanor seemed to be seeing me clearly, not as a threat to her authority or an obstacle to her plans, but as someone with a mind she could respect. "The family office is not a consolation prize, Sarah. It's the right deployment of my particular skills at this juncture, just as the CDO position is the right deployment of yours." I nodded, understanding the subtext. Eleanor wasn't surrendering control. She was reconceptualizing her role in response to changed circumstances, and she expected me to recognize the difference. "I've never underestimated you, Eleanor," I said honestly, "not even when we were most at odds." "No," she agreed, resuming our walk along the garden path. "That's one reason I found you so challenging. You saw through the social niceties to the power dynamics beneath." She gestured toward an immaculately pruned rose garden ahead. "People think I'm rigid because I like structure and order. But look at these roses. The structure is what allows them to flourish. Without support and boundaries, they'd collapse under their own weight." It was perhaps the most revealing statement Eleanor had ever made to me about her worldview. She genuinely believed her controlling behaviors were supportive rather than restrictive, providing the framework within which others could thrive. The difference, I suggested gently, is that roses don't resent the trellises that support them. People need to choose their own supports. Eleanor considered this, head tilted slightly. An interesting perspective. Perhaps that's where I've erred, in assuming everyone benefited from the same structures that strengthened me. She stopped at a juncture in the path, where one route led back to the house and another continued deeper into the gardens. We should head back. They'll be wondering where we've disappeared to. As we walked toward the house, Eleanor added one final comment that surprised me with its directness. I still don't entirely approve of how you handled the loyalty contract situation, Sarah. But I respect that you fought for your principles without destroying the family in the process. That shows character. Coming from Eleanor Mitchell, this qualified acknowledgement was tantamount to a standing ovation. Thank you, I replied simply. For what it's worth, I respect your willingness to adapt rather than entrench. That also shows character. A ghost of a smile touched her lips as we reached the terrace doors. Then perhaps we can build on that. Mutual respect as we move forward. Professional boundaries, clear authorities, and recognition of each other's strengths. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. Inside, we found Richard, Rebecca, and Daniel reviewing final points of the agreement. James had arrived during our absence, having come directly from the office after his meeting with the Henderson team. His expression brightened when he saw Eleanor and me returning from the garden together, apparently on civil terms. "Did I miss anything important?" he asked, glancing between us with barely concealed curiosity. "Just a brief discussion about appropriate boundaries and mutual respect," Eleanor replied smoothly. Sarah and I were discovering some common ground. James's eyebrows rose in surprise, but before he could respond, Daniel called our attention to the finalized documents. "If everyone is satisfied with these terms, we can proceed with signatures," he announced, laying out several copies on Richard's desk. One by one, we took our turn signing. Richard and Eleanor first, as the original trustees, then Rebecca, James, and finally me, as the newest member of the Mitchell family governance structure. The formality of the moment wasn't lost on any of us. We were codifying a new approach to family relationships, company leadership, and legacy preservation, all stemming from a crisis triggered by a loyalty contract that would now be explicitly prohibited by the very document we were signing. As Martha reappeared with champagne to mark the occasion, Richard raised his glass in a toast. "To the Mitchell family, past, present, and future. May we honor our legacy by embracing change rather than resisting it." We all drank to that sentiment, the mood one of cautious optimism rather than triumphant victory or bitter defeat. Eleanor caught my eye across the circle, her expression a complex mixture of resignation and resolve. She had lost a battle but repositioned herself advantageously for the continuing campaign, the never-ending work of family leadership and legacy preservation. I raised my glass slightly in private acknowledgement, and she returned the gesture with the faintest nod. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was a workable armistice, a foundation upon which we might eventually build something approaching genuine respect, if not actual affection. And for the Mitchell family, that represented more progress than I would have thought possible just days earlier. As James and I prepared to leave, Richard drew me aside for a private word. "Thank you," he said simply, "for fighting this battle the right way, firmly, but not destructively. You've helped this family find a better path forward." "We all did," I corrected gently. "Even Eleanor in her own way." Richard smiled, the expression softening the lines of strain that had marked his face for months. "Especially Eleanor. It took remarkable courage for her to propose stepping down as CEO, to acknowledge that the company's needs have evolved beyond her particular skills." His gaze drifted to where his wife stood in conversation with Daniel, discussing details of the family office establishment. She's an extraordinary woman, for all her flaws. I'm glad you found a way to work with her, rather than against. Earls? So am I said sincerely, though I suspect we'll still have our disagreements. Oh, undoubtedly, Richard chuckled. Eleanor wouldn't be Eleanor without strong opinions forcefully expressed. But now those opinions will be offered within a framework that respects everyone's autonomy. As James and I drove home, the significance of the day's events continued to resonate. We had begun with a crisis triggered by Eleanor's attempt to control family members through loyalty contracts. We were ending with a restructured family governance system, a professional transition plan for the company, and a new family office that channeled Eleanor's organizational skills toward positive ends rather than restrictive controls. I still can't believe Mother proposed stepping down as CEO, James marveled, echoing my own lingering surprise. She's been the driving force behind Mitchell Media for as long as I can remember. She's still protecting her legacy, I observed, just in a different way. By stepping aside gracefully and helping shape the transition, she ensures her influence continues in the areas she cares about most. James nodded slowly. That makes sense. And the family office gives her a defined domain where her skills are valuable without being suffocating. He glanced at me curiously. What did you two talk about in the garden? You seemed different when you came back, less like adversaries. I considered how to describe the subtle shift in my relationship with Eleanor. We reached an understanding, I said finally. Not friendship, not even alliance necessarily, but a recognition that we can work together professionally despite our personal differences. I smiled slightly, recalling Eleanor's rose garden metaphor. We're both strong-willed women who care about the Mitchell legacy, just with very different ideas about how to preserve it. Well, whatever you discussed, I'm grateful, James said, reaching for my hand. Seeing you and Mother engaged in civil conversation rather than strategic combat. It's more than I hoped for even a few days ago. As we pulled into our townhouse driveway, I thought about the journey we'd traveled since that certified letter had arrived with its demands for loyalty. The path had been difficult, confrontational, at times painful, but it had led to a healthier family system, a more sustainable company structure, and surprisingly, a more authentic relationship with Eleanor Mitchell herself. Not because I had surrendered to her demands or because she had abandoned her core values, but because we had found a way to acknowledge each other's strengths while establishing clear boundaries around our respective domains. It wasn't the neat resolution of a fairy tale, with all conflicts magically resolved and all parties transformed. It was messier, more realistic, and ultimately more meaningful. A pragmatic accommodation between strong-willed individuals who recognize the value in preserving family bonds despite their differences. And perhaps, I reflected as we entered our home together, that was the most important lesson in this entire ordeal. True loyalty couldn't be mandated by contract or enforced through control. It emerged naturally when people's autonomy was respected, their contributions valued, and their boundaries honored. Eleanor Mitchell had sought to secure loyalty through legal obligation. Instead, she was discovering that genuine loyalty could only be earned through mutual respect, a lesson that would serve the Mitchell family well in the generations to come. 6 months can transform an entire world. Half a year after that pivotal meeting in Richard's study, the Mitchell family and business had evolved in ways none of us could have fully anticipated. The autumn chill had given way to winter snow, then spring renewal, and now summer warmth as I walked through the newly renovated reception area of Mitchell Media. The space symbolized the company's transition, modern elements integrated with traditional architecture, digital displays alongside, vintage printing presses preserved as art installations, a metaphor made manifest in steel, glass, and history. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell." The receptionist greeted me with a smile free from the nervous tension that had characterized staff interactions during Eleanor's daily reign. The executive team is gathering in the main conference room. Mr. Henderson arrived early and is asking about the quarterly analytics. Thank you, Nicole. I adjusted my portfolio as I headed toward the elevators. And please, it's still Sarah. The title Mrs. Mitchell felt particularly ironic today of all days, the morning of Eleanor's official installation as director of the Mitchell family office. After months of careful preparation, the transition was complete. Richard had served his term as interim CEO, overseeing the search process that had resulted in the hiring of Abigail Chen, a brilliantly innovative publishing executive with digital savvy that had immediately impressed the board. I had accepted the position of Chief Digital Officer with clearly defined authority and a dedicated team. And James had stepped into his new role as Chief Strategy Officer with growing confidence, finally emerging from his mother's shadow. The executive floor had undergone its own transformation. Open collaborative spaces replacing walled offices, glass partitions instead of closed doors. I found Thomas Bradford, still serving as board chairman, in conversation with Abigail near the conference room entrance. Sarah, Abigail greeted me warmly. Perfect timing. Henderson's asking about the engagement metrics for the new platform. The dashboard shows a 43% increase since implementation, I replied, pulling up the relevant report on my tablet. User retention is particularly strong in the key demographic segments. Bradford nodded approvingly. Impressive. Results for such a short implementation timeline. The board is quite pleased with the digital transformation progress. It was a casual comment, but one that reflected months of intensive work. Rebuilding Mitchell Media's technological infrastructure, modernizing content delivery systems, implementing analytics capabilities that had previously been rudimentary, at best. The Henderson account had been just the beginning, a proof of concept that had led to a comprehensive digital strategy now benefiting the entire client portfolio. We're still early in the process, I reminded him, mindful of managing expectations. The real impact will be more evident after the second phase rollout next quarter. Always the cautious one, James observed, joining our conversation with a grin. He looked different these days, more relaxed, more confident, his natural leadership, qualities flourishing now that he wasn't constantly second-guessing himself against Eleanor's expectations. The Henderson team is thrilled with the results. They've already approved the budget for Phase 2. Our professional conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's arrival, her creative energy immediately filling the space. As creative director, for the newly established Mitchell Media Digital Content Studio, she'd found her perfect niche within the family business, a role that valued her artistic sensibilities without forcing her into traditional publishing constraints. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, sliding her presentation materials onto the conference table. The animation team had a rendering issue with the Henderson campaign visuals. All sorted now. She glanced around the assembled group. "Is Mother here yet?" "Not yet," James replied, checking his watch. "The family office inauguration ceremony is at 11. She'll join us for the Henderson presentation first." The mention of Eleanor brought a momentary shift in the room's atmosphere. Not tension exactly, but awareness. Though she had officially stepped down as CEO months ago, her influence remained a presence in the company she had helped build. These days, that influence was more ceremonial than operational, focused on client relationships and community connections rather than day-to-day decisions. But today's official launch of the Mitchell family office represented the final step in her transition, a public acknowledgement of her new role. The conference room doors opened, and Eleanor entered with characteristic precision timing, Richard at her side. Though no longer CEO, she still carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to command, her tailored suit and impeccable grooming projecting professional polish. Yet there were subtle differences in her demeanor, a slightly softer edge to her interactions, a more collaborative approach to conversations. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted the assembled team with practiced warmth. "Mr. Henderson, so good to see you again. I trust you're pleased with the results of our digital initiative? As client pleasantries were exchanged and the team settled around the conference table, I found myself studying Eleanor with professional curiosity. Our relationship had evolved into something I would never have predicted 6 months ago. Not friendship, certainly, but a mutual respect that allowed for productive collaboration despite our fundamental differences in approach and philosophy. The presentation proceeded smoothly, with each team member addressing their specific areas of expertise. When my turn came, I outlined the digital performance metrics with confident precision, noting Eleanor's attentive focus. She no longer attempted to control these presentations, but she absorbed every detail, her mind clearly filing away information for future reference. The integration of traditional media placements with digital touchpoints has been particularly effective, I concluded, pulling up a heat map showing engagement patterns. We're seeing significant crossover between print readers and digital platform users, with higher conversion rates than industry standards. Eleanor nodded her approval, a small gesture that would have once seemed patronizing, but now registered as professional acknowledgement between colleagues. Our weekly strategy sessions over the past months had established a working rhythm that allowed us to leverage each other's strengths without triggering territorial reactions. Excellent work, Abigail commented as I concluded my segment. Sarah's digital leadership has transformed our capabilities in remarkably short order. The praise was genuine, but unnecessary. The metrics spoke for themselves. Yet, I appreciated the public recognition from our new CEO, whose arrival had cemented the company's commitment to evolution rather than entrenchment. As the presentation concluded, and the Henderson team departed with enthusiastic commitments to expanded engagement, Eleanor approached me privately. "The analytics dashboard you've developed is quite impressive," she observed, her tone businesslike but not cold. "I'd like something similar for the family office launch, a way to track our community impact metrics in real time." It was a reasonable request that acknowledged my expertise while respecting the boundaries of my role. "I can have my team develop something appropriate," I agreed. "Though the community impact metrics will be different from our commercial analytics." "Of course," Eleanor nodded. "Perhaps we could discuss the specific parameters this afternoon. I have some thoughts on measurable outcomes for philanthropic initiatives." "I have a gap between 2 and 3, I offered, checking my calendar. "Perfect. My office, or rather, my former office." A hint of wry humor colored her tone, another small shift in her typically formal demeanor. "Abigail has graciously allowed me to use it until the family office space renovations are complete." As Eleanor moved away to speak with Bradford about the inauguration ceremony, James appeared at my side. "Still strange to see you two having civil conversations," he murmured, a smile softening the observation. "There are moments I think I've slipped into an alternate universe." "Professional respect doesn't require personal affinity," I reminded him, though I returned his smile. "Your mother and I have found our equilibrium. She no longer tries to control my career, and I acknowledge her expertise in areas where she genuinely excels." "A diplomatic masterpiece worthy of international recognition," James teased, though the underlying sentiment was sincere. The transformation in his family's dynamics had lifted a weight he'd carried for years, the constant pressure of balancing loyalties between his wife and his mother. "How are preparations for the ceremony?" I asked as we walked together toward my office. "Meticulous, as you'd expect, with Mother orchestrating every detail. The governor's attending, along with half the state's business leaders and philanthropic organizations." James shook his head in fond exasperation. Only Eleanor Mitchell could make stepping down from power into a demonstration of influence. "It's actually quite strategic," I observed. "By making the family office launch such a high-profile event, she's establishing its importance from day one. No one will view it as a consolation prize or a retirement sinecure." "You almost sound impressed," James noted, studying my expression. "I am," I admitted honestly. "She's handled this transition with remarkable grace. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought it possible. The Mitchell family office inauguration ceremony that afternoon transformed the Oak Ridge Country Club's grand ballroom into a showcase of the family's community connections. Every detail reflected Eleanor's meticulous planning, from the historical displays chronicling the Mitchell family's philanthropic legacy to the carefully curated guest list representing key community partnerships. As James and I circulated through the pre-ceremony reception, the shifting power dynamics within the Mitchell orbit were evident in subtle interactions. Board members who once deferred automatically to Eleanor now engaged directly with Abigail on company matters. Community leaders sought out Richard with renewed respect, acknowledging his return to active leadership during the transition. And, most tellingly, several guests approached me directly about digital initiatives, no longer routing such inquiries through Eleanor's gatekeeping. Mrs. Mitchell. Patricia Wilson, Eleanor's longtime friend and confidant, intercepted me near the historical displays. A moment of your time, if you wouldn't mind. Patricia had been notably absent during the loyalty contract confrontation, traveling in Europe during that pivotal period. Her relationship with Eleanor had reportedly cooled upon her return when she learned of her friend's heavy-handed approach to family governance. Of course, I replied, curious about this unexpected overture from someone who had typically regarded me with polite indifference. I wanted to acknowledge your role in how positively this transition has unfolded, Patricia said, her voice lowered despite the ambient conversation around us. Eleanor would never admit it, but your refusal to sign that ridiculous contract was the catalyst this family needed. The frank assessment surprised me. That's kind of you to say, though I think Richard deserves most of the credit for guiding the process toward a constructive resolution. Richard provided the framework. Certainly, Patricia agreed with a knowing smile. But you provided the backbone. Standing up to Eleanor Mitchell is not for the faint of heart. Believe me, I've known her for 30 years. She glanced across the room to where Eleanor was engaged in conversation with the governor. She's different these days, more focused on building things up than controlling them. I haven't seen her this energized in years. It was an insightful observation from someone who had witnessed Eleanor's evolution over decades rather than months. The family office suits her strengths, I acknowledged. She can apply her organizational talents to initiatives that benefit the community without micromanaging family members' lives. Precisely. Patricia nodded approvingly. And you found your own place within the Mitchell ecosystem without surrendering your independence. Rather impressive navigation of treacherous waters, my dear. As Patricia moved away to greet other guests, Rebecca appeared at my elbow, resplendent in a sculptural dress that defied conventional business attire while remaining undeniably elegant. Making nice with Mother's spy network? She teased, having observed my conversation with Patricia. Receiving unexpected compliments, actually, I replied, sharing Patricia's observations about Eleanor's changed focus. Rebecca considered this thoughtfully. She's right, you know. Mother is different these days, still terrifyingly efficient, and occasionally dictatorial, but channeling those qualities toward actual community benefit rather than family control. She sipped her champagne, watching Eleanor across the room. I never thought I'd say this, but the family office might be the best thing that could have happened, for her and for us. The ceremony itself was a masterclass in elegant transitions. Richard spoke movingly about the Mitchell family's multi-generational commitment to Oak Ridge's development. The governor praised Eleanor's business leadership and anticipated her contributions in this new philanthropic role. And Eleanor herself delivered remarks that balanced pride in past accomplishments with vision for future initiatives, a perfect blend of legacy acknowledgement and forward momentum. The Mitchell family office will serve as a bridge between our community's proud history and its promising future, she concluded, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. By coordinating philanthropic initiatives, preserving cultural heritage, and nurturing next-generation leadership, we will ensure that the values that built Oak Ridge continue to guide its growth. As applause filled the room, I found myself genuinely moved by the moment's significance. Eleanor had transformed what could have been a humiliating retreat from power into a dignified transition to a new kind of influence, one focused on community impact rather than corporate control or family domination. The reception following. The ceremony provided an opportunity for more intimate conversations away from the formal program. I was discussing digital resource access initiatives with the Library Foundation director when Richard approached, gently interrupting with apologies. "I wonder if I might borrow my daughter-in-law for a moment," he requested, guiding me toward a quieter corner once the foundation director had graciously excused herself. "There's someone who's been waiting to speak with you." To my surprise, Richard led me to a small anteroom off the main reception hall, where Eleanor sat alone, momentarily separated from the constant stream of well-wishers. She rose as we entered, her expression composed but uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I'll leave you two to talk," Richard said, touching his wife's shoulder gently before withdrawing, closing the door behind him. Eleanor gestured to a chair, opposite her own. "Thank you for indulging this private conversation on what's already been a demanding day." I took the offered seat, curious about this unprecedented request for one-on-one dialogue outside our established professional interactions. "Congratulations on the inauguration. It was beautifully orchestrated." "Thank you." She accepted the compliment with a slight nod. Though orchestration has always been my strong suit, it's the emotional complexities I tend to handle less gracefully. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Which brings me to the purpose of this conversation." I waited, allowing her the space to proceed at her own pace, a courtesy I might not have extended 6 months earlier, when every interaction felt like a strategic battle. "When I first proposed those loyalty contracts," Eleanor began, addressing the subject directly for the first time since our confrontation, "I genuinely believed I was protecting this family's interests, preserving our legacy against potential threats." Her gaze met mine steadily. I was wrong. The simple acknowledgement hung in the air between us, more powerful for its unadorned directness. "Not about the importance of the legacy," she continued, after a moment, "but about how best to protect it. Control doesn't preserve what matters. It stifles the very growth necessary for genuine continuity." Eleanor's hands, usually so steady, showed the slightest tremor as she smoothed her skirt. "Your refusal to sign that contract forced me to confront assumptions I'd never questioned. For that uncomfortable but necessary awakening, I owe you my gratitude." It was perhaps the most authentic communication we'd ever shared. No social niceties, no strategic positioning, just honest acknowledgement of a difficult truth. "Thank you for telling me this," I replied, matching her directness. "Though I suspect Richard's intervention was ultimately more influential than my resistance." "Richard provided the framework for change," Eleanor agreed, unconsciously echoing Patricia's earlier assessment. "But your stand against a system you recognized as fundamentally flawed was the catalyst. Different contributions, both necessary." She reached into a small portfolio beside her chair and withdrew an envelope bearing the Mitchell family crest, similar to the one that had contained the loyalty contract, but slimmer, less formal. "I wanted to share this with you privately before including it in the general announcement," she said, handing me the envelope. "The first official initiative of the Mitchell family office." Inside, I found a prospectus for the Mitchell Digital Inclusion Foundation, a new nonprofit entity dedicated to expanding technology access across socioeconomic barriers in the Oak Ridge community. The mission statement outlined comprehensive programs, from providing hardware and connectivity to underserved neighborhoods to offering digital literacy training for seniors and career transition support. This addresses several of the community needs we discussed during our digital strategy sessions, I observed, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful integration of social impact with technological resources. "Your insights shaped the foundation structure," Eleanor acknowledged, The board would benefit from your expertise, should you be willing to serve. She held up a hand to forestall any immediate response. Not as a Mitchell family obligation, but as a professional whose guidance would strengthen the initiative. The commitment would be quarterly meetings, with appropriate compensation for your time. The offer represented a new plateau in our evolving relationship, a professional invitation based on genuine respect for my expertise, with clear boundaries and explicit value recognition. No manipulation, no family pressure, just a straightforward proposal that I could accept or decline based on my own interests. I'd be happy to serve on the foundation board, I said after brief consideration. The mission aligns with my professional values, and the structure you've outlined respects my other commitments. Excellent, Eleanor nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. The formal announcement will be made next week, once the incorporation paperwork is finalized. She hesitated, then added, Richard suggested I might ask you to collaborate on the launch strategy. A joint presentation would send a powerful message about family unity while respecting our distinct professional domains, I agreed, thinking through the practical implications. Perhaps with James and Rebecca involved as well, a true cross-generational initiative. My thoughts exactly. A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. We make rather effective colleagues when we're not locked in power struggles. We do, I acknowledged with my own smile, the moment notable for its lack of underlying tension. The conversation might have continued, but a discreet knock at the door signaled that our private interlude had reached its natural conclusion. The outside world was reclaiming Eleanor for her ceremonial duties, and my professional obligations awaited as well. As we returned to the reception, moving in separate directions to engage with different groups, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey from confrontation to collaboration. 6 months ago, I had been fighting for my independence against Eleanor's controlling loyalty contract. Today, we were professional allies engaged in parallel missions, her leading the family's community impact initiatives, me directing the Z company's digital transformation, each respecting the other's domain while finding constructive points of intersection. Later that evening, as James and I returned to our townhouse after the long day of ceremonies and receptions, he broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind since observing my private conversation with his mother. You and Mother seemed to reach some kind of understanding today, he noted as we settled into our living room, shoes discarded and formal attire loosened. More than just professional courtesy. She thanked me, I said simply, still processing the interaction myself. For challenging the loyalty contract, said it forced her to question assumptions she'd never examined. James's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unprecedented. Mother acknowledging she was wrong about anything, let alone thanking someone for pointing it out. He shook his head in wonder. The world really has turned upside down. Not upside down, I corrected gently. Just realigned. Your mother hasn't fundamentally changed who she is. She's still organized, strategic, and deeply committed to the Mitchell legacy. But she's directing those qualities toward more constructive ends now. And you've found a way to work with her professionally without compromising your independence, James observed. Something I wasn't sure was possible 6 months ago. The observation captured the essence of our new equilibrium. Not perfect. Harmony, but functional respect within appropriate boundaries. Eleanor and I would never share the easy affection she craved from a daughter-in-law, but we had established something potentially more enduring. Mutual professional respect, based on recognition of each other's distinct value. She invited me to serve on the board of her new Digital Inclusion Foundation, I told him, sharing the contents of the envelope Eleanor had given me. As a professional whose expertise would benefit the initiative, not as a family obligation. James reviewed the prospectus with growing approval. This is actually brilliant, leveraging both your digital expertise and Mother's community connections to address a genuine need. He looked up with a smile. and offering appropriate compensation for your time. That's Mother acknowledging your professional value in the clearest possible terms. It's a good foundation for moving forward, I agreed. Clear boundaries, defined responsibilities, mutual respect. Speaking of moving forward, James set aside the foundation materials and reached for a folder he'd brought home from the office. Abigail asked me to give you this, the revised organizational chart incorporating the expansion we discussed last week. She's approved the additional team members for your division. The company reorganization reflected our continued evolution, stronger digital capabilities, more integrated approaches to client services, clearer reporting relationships, free from the ambiguities that had characterized Eleanor's management style. In many ways, Mitchell Media was healthier now than it had been in years, rejuvenated by the leadership transition and structural reforms triggered by our family governance crisis. We've come a long way from that loyalty contract, I observed, reviewing the organizational changes with professional satisfaction. What started as a family conflict has ended up strengthening both the company and the family itself. Not ended, James corrected, echoing my earlier sentiment. Family evolution doesn't end. It just reaches new equilibrium points as circumstances change. He took my hand, his expression turning reflective. I've been thinking about that lately, especially with Dad talking about stepping back from the board chairmanship next year. Another transition to navigate, I acknowledged, though hopefully less dramatic than the last one. Much less dramatic, James agreed with a smile, but it got me thinking about our own next chapter. He hesitated briefly, then continued. We've always said we wanted children eventually. With the company stabilized and our professional roles secure, maybe it's time to revisit that conversation. The suggestion caught me by surprise, not because we hadn't discussed children before, but because the timing felt so appropriate. Our careers established, our marriage stronger after weathering significant challenges, the Mitchell family governance, reformed to respect individual autonomy rather than demanding conformity. Eleanor would be an intimidating grandmother, I observed, only half joking, though I suspect she'd channel that energy into educational foundations and leadership development programs rather than trying to micromanage our parenting. The Mitchell family office would suddenly develop a youth initiative, James agreed with a laugh, complete with strategic developmental milestones and quarterly progress reviews. The humor contained a kernel of truth. Eleanor would always be Eleanor, with her organizational zeal and strategic focus. But the frameworks we'd established over the past 6 months had created space for that energy to be constructive rather than controlling, supportive without being suffocating. I think we're ready, I said after a thoughtful pause. Not because everything's perfect, but because we've learned how to navigate the imperfections together. James's expression softened with emotion. That's what I love about you. Your ability to see the opportunity in challenges, the path forward through complications. A quality your mother might actually appreciate, I noted with ironic self-awareness, though she'd implement it with considerably more tactical precision. God help us all if you two ever truly joined forces, James laughed. The world wouldn't stand a chance. The jest carried a grain of truth that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier, the recognition that Eleanor and I, despite our profound differences in approach and philosophy, shared certain fundamental qualities. Determination, strategic thinking, unwillingness to surrender on matters of principle. The same characteristics that had made us such formidable opponents now allowed us to engage as respectful colleagues, each secure in our own domain. As we discussed the practical considerations of family planning, timing, career adjustments, household reorganization, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with that certified letter bearing the Mitchell family crest. What had started as an attempt to control me through a loyalty contract had instead catalyzed a comprehensive reformation of family governance, company leadership, and interpersonal boundaries. Not because anyone had completely surrendered their core values, but because we had collectively found a better way to honor them, through mutual respect rather than dominance, through clear boundaries rather than forced conformity, through recognition of diverse strengths rather than insistence. Ununiform approach. The Mitchell family loyalty contract that Eleanor had intended as a tool of control had instead become the catalyst for genuine loyalty. The kind that emerges naturally when people's autonomy is respected, their contributions valued, and their boundaries honored. The kind that can't be mandated by signature or enforced by threat, but grows organically from mutual respect and shared purpose. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about the generations of Mitchells yet to come, children who would grow up in a family system that valued their individuality while honoring shared heritage, that balanced tradition with innovation, that recognized loyalty as something freely given rather than contractually enforced. The loyalty contract that had never been signed had ultimately created something far more valuable than the document itself could ever have secured. A family foundation built on authentic respect, rather than obligatory compliance. Not perfect, certainly, and still evolving as all living systems must, but fundamentally healthier, more resilient, and ultimately more faithful to the true meaning of family loyalty than any legal document could ever ensure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.